The Old Republic was the Republic of legend, greater than distance or time. No need to note where it was or whence it came, only to know that it was the Republic. So wrote the Ancient Order of the Whills in their chronicles of the history of the Star Wars galaxy, centuries after the fall of the Galactic Empire. In their time, the Galactic Republic was dead and gone, having collapsed long ago under the weight of its own failures. But it nonetheless cast a shadow over galactic history. No power in the galaxy had nearly as titanic a role in history as the Republic, and only the Jedi Order itself surpassed it in age. The Republic, at the time of its transformation into the Empire, was 25,034 years old. It was so ancient that, in reality, humanity literally has nothing that can compare to its age in terms of man-made constructs. But the Republic did come from somewhere. It did have a beginning. Today, we'll be discussing it. In the year 25,200 BBY, the infinite empire of the Rakata, which had previously been the dominant force in the galaxy, collapsed between the pressures of slave rebellions, a brutal plague, and a civil war. As the Rakata quickly retreated from the known galaxy, fleeing back to Lehon, their homeworld, they left dozens of formerly enslaved species behind, well aware that there were other civilians and other livable worlds out in the wider galaxy. Some, like the distant Tianese and their Hutt rivals, reacted by trying to kill each other. Others, like the civilians in what would become the core worlds, started to talk instead. The core worlds, specifically the strip of space that would be nicknamed the Arrowhead in later years, were already teeming with activity well before the Rakata left, however. By the time the Rakata discovered them in 30,000 BBY, the humans of Coruscant had already transformed their homeworld into a massive planetary city and had discovered interstellar travel. Unlike with some of the other worlds they enslaved, the Rakatan grip on Coruscant was unusually light, likely due to the fact that the planet-wide city was impossible for them to tightly control. As a result, the humans began to quietly steal Rakatan technology. By 27,500 BBY, humanity had advanced enough that it was able to send out sleeper ships from Coruscant, colonizing other worlds and forming dozens of satellite civilizations. In the core worlds, human sleeper ships landed on Alsaken, Agsum, Metalos, Tapasi, Kuwait, Alderaan, Corphi, Chorus Major, Rendili, Korulag, Chandrila, Brental 4, Essalus, Renal, and Raltir, with each world becoming the heart of a new civilization. When the Rakata left the core, 2,000 years after these colonization efforts began, humanity had already built itself a rather expansive civilization. These ancient human colonies had already developed their own distinct cultures, governments, and niches in human civilization by this point in time. The seven worlds of the Koros system, which were Gilad, Moses, Koros Major, Trias, Thyrus, Phoros, and Veronica, became their own fractious civilization, which didn't unite for over 20,000 years but still managed to contribute greatly to human civilization, being humanity's primary sources of carbonite. Alsaken and Metalos took after Coruscant in becoming city planets. Alsaken built up its own civilization that came to rival Coruscant itself, while Metalos acted as more of a Coruscanti satellite. Corphe established itself as a hub for trade with Corellia and Duro, while Tapasi and Alderaan established monarchies that would last for millennia to come, with Alderaan being widely known for its natural beauty as well. Early sleeper ship expeditions colonized 6 worlds in the Ringali Shell, which became the cause of small civilizations that enjoyed frequent contact due to their close proximity to each other. Brental 4 became a major trading hub, Chandrila became an agricultural world, Korulag became well known for its swoop races, and Raltir established a banking system that endured even up to the Mandalorian Wars. Essalus, another Ringali shell world founded by the Essilian Empire, conquered Renal and eventually 18 other worlds in the region. Essalus wasn't the only one of humanity's colonies to form its own empire, either. Rendili and Kuwait, both worlds that would later become famous for their warships, became military fortresses with their own mini-empires. Humbarine, another one of humanity's most important worlds, actually originated as a Kuwaiti colony before breaking off to form its own civilization. And Agsum, together with its sister world Anaxis, became the heart of the Azure Imperium, an ancient empire known for its navy. Other notable civilizations were built around Shorkin and Kaikilis. There were other civilizations in the core as well. The humans of Corellia, for example, were actually already in place well before Coruscant started sending out sleeper ships, having been transplanted to the system by the Celestials long ago. The Corellians united with the Selonians and the Drall, the native species of Selonia and Drall, two other worlds in the system, and together they colonized Talus and Trailus, forming the Five Brothers, a union that started building up its own mini-empire. The Duros of nearby Duro did the same and established relations with Corellia, the human colony of Corphi, and the Herglic trade empire in the southern core. Other alien civilizations in the core included the Colomai of Colomus, an advanced race that had discovered interstellar travel tens of thousands of years before, and the Kamasi of Kamas, a peaceful people known for their morality and beautiful homeworld. With the Rakata out of the core, all of these civilizations began to expand and collide, some peacefully and some with war. More importantly, however, they began to examine the technology the Rakata had left behind. Rakadan technology was far more advanced than even that of the Colomai, but slowly, the core civilization started to figure out how some of it worked. Technology as crucial as droids and blaster weaponry originated in this way, and for the record, this is why technology in the Star Wars universe seemingly advanced slowly. For most of the Republic's history, the advancements made were just the Republic scientists learning to reverse engineer Rakadan technology better, before they eventually came to understand and surpass it. In 25,053 BBY, about a century and a half after the fall of the Infinite Empire, the most important of these Rakata-based inventions came about, the hyperdrive. Scientists working on Corellia and Duro had studied Rakatan hyperdrive technology for decades after the fall of the Infinite Empire, trying to get it to work. They had one major obstacle in this process. The Rakatan hyperdrive, like most Rakatan technology, could only be operated by Force sensitives. The devices eventually used the Force to streamline hyperspace travel, allowing Rakatan ships to just home in on Force-sensitive worlds. The Corellian and Duros eventually figured out how to remove these components, creating a device that instead just allowed for travel through hyperspace. Thus, the modern hyperdrive was born. Hyperdrive technology spread like wildfire. At first, hyperspace travel relied on beacons built at jump points, which broadcast signals to replace the Force signatures that Rakatan hyperdrives used for navigation, a system that was eventually phased out altogether. The core worlds quickly built their own beacons, and soon, the first hyperspace routes were formed between them. However, the spread of hyperspace technology sent tremors through the core. Not all of these early civilizations were as peaceful as the Alderaanians and the Kamasi. Some had built empires with strong expansionist tendencies and saw the hyperdrive as an opportunity they could use to take over the core. Parts of the core were already at war by the time the hyperdrive came into being, but its discovery brought the war to the entire region. It is unknown what the sides in this conflict were exactly, but there are a few that we can easily determine. Coruscant, Alsaken, and their respective colonies were likely major factors, as were Corellia, Duro, and their colonies. Kuwait and Rendili, both of which were very militarized, likely fought, as did Humberine. Axum and its Azure Empire probably played a major role in the conflict, and the same was surely true for the Esselian Empire. The various warring factions quickly grouped up into two alliances, one led by Coruscant and one led by a group of vicious warlords, which history remembered as the Forces of Evil. Based on divisions from the early Republic era, we'd guess that Coruscant was allied with Koros, Alderaan, the Azure Empyrean, Humberine, Metzelos, Kekilius, Corellia, Duro, Colomus, Kamas, and Corphi. The so-called Forces of Evil were likely based around the Esselian Empire, the most expansionist of the core civilizations, which was likely allied with Korolag, Chandrila, Brental IV, Raltir, Kuwait, Tapasi, Shorkin, Rendili, and Alsaken. Little is known about the participants on either side, though we do know that the brutal warlord Zakranend Minus was involved, likely on the side of evil. Very little is known about this conflict except for how it ended. A group of Jedi Knights, whose order was at that time based far beyond the borders of the core, fought on the side of Coruscant, which helped tip the tide in Coruscant's favor. They were aided by the Order of the Dai Bendu, one of the galaxy's most ancient orders of Force sensitives. With the help of the Jedi and the Bendu, Coruscant and its allies eventually won the war. This conflict was the last war fought between civilizations of the core until the Clone Wars split the galaxy in two, and in later years, it was referred to as the Unification Wars. In the aftermath of the Unification Wars, all the greatest worlds of the core came together to discuss their future, a shared future. Representatives from Coruscant, Alderaan, Corellia, Duro, Alsaken, Kamas, Axum, Brental, Kuwait, Esselis, Rendili, Humberin, Trangila, Rinal, Shulkin, Tapasi, Koralag, and Kakilius, among others, met and made the decision to unite under one government. 15 humans, led by a representative of Alderaan's House Organa, drafted the Galactic Constitution, a document that outlined plans for a government run by the Senate, detailed protections for various rights of member worlds and individual citizens, and the formation of a republic of which all the core founders would be members on equal terms. And thus, in 25,053 BBY, the hyperdrive was discovered, the unification wars consumed the core, and at the end of it all, the Galactic Republic came into being. Coruscant was chosen to be the new capital of the Republic, as it sat at the end of crucial hyperspace routes leading to Corellia and Esselis, which would become the start of the Corellian Run and the Polemian trade route, respectively. To represent itself, the Republic chose the very symbol that the Bendu monks had marched under in the Unification Wars. 8 spokes united around a common center, representing how the Force connected all living beings. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, as Luke Skywalker was told by Obi-Wan Kenobi not long before the Battle of Yavin. At various points in their shared history, in fact, the Jedi and the Republic might as well have been synonymous, considering how closely they worked with each other. But how did this arrangement begin? How did the Jedi Order come to serve the Republic? In this video, the second installment in our series on Republic history, we'll be exploring just that. When we left off at the end of our previous video, which discussed the settling of the core in the Unification Wars, the year was 25,053 BBY, and the Galactic Republic had just been founded. Over the course of the next few decades, it began to solidify and explore more of the galaxy. Historians consider this the start of the Expansionist Age, a roughly 5,000-year period of history that marked the earliest period of the Republic's development. During this first leg of that period, the core worlds were explored a bit more, with routes in the Arrowhead region being made more reliable and stray systems in the region being added to the charts here and there. Meanwhile, the Republic also began to expand into the colonies, the region just outside of the core worlds. Over the course of the Republic's next first centuries, a wide swath of the region was opened up, with Nemoidia, Katada, Comenor, Khalida, Byblos, Karida, Uviu Exen, and Arcania all joining the Republic during this time. The first years of the Republic also saw the blazing of the first of the Republic's most crucial hyperspace routes. In the southwest, Corellians and Duros blazed the start of a route that, thousands of years later, would become the Corellian trade spine. In the southeast, the Corellians extended the spin, the route between Corellia and Coruscant, into the start of the Corellian Run, which by 24,500 BBY had reached Isono and Denon, 2 worlds in the Inner Rim that would become rich and powerful in later years. But the work of the Corellians couldn't compare to the sheer luck of the Polemians. Polemia was a small shipyard world located on the Axis, a route that stretched from Coruscant to Raltir, connecting some of the most powerful core worlds. The Polemians worked to extend the route, pushing it northeast into the unknown, and they struck gold. Between the founding of the Republic and 25,000 BBY, in just 53 short years, these mad lads pushed what would become the Polemian trade route all the way into the Outer Rim. Along the way, they discovered a number of soon-to-be important systems, including Yabul Oppa, Castel, Tiran, Tanab, Lantiles, Roche, Abhin, Liana, and eventually Colomux. The Republic explored a bit of the space near Colomux, and in 25,000 BBY, they discovered Ossus, where they made their first official contact with the Jedi Order. The Jedi Knights, the followers of the light and defenders of the balance of the Force, were one of the most ancient organizations in the galaxy. The foundations of the Jedi Order were laid in 36,453 BBY, when the Thoyor, a mysterious collective of ships that resembled Mortis, gathered Force sensitives from all over the galaxy and brought them to Tython, a world deep in the core. Tython was exceptionally strong in the Force, and those beings who were brought there by Tho'Yor dedicated their lives to its study, naming themselves the Jedi. For over 10,000 years, the Jedi of Tython studied the Force, but the peace of that idyllic world was shattered a few centuries before the formation of the Republic. Originally, the Jedi had studied both the light and the dark, which they referred to as the Ashlar and the Bogan. But over time, members of the Order began to drift toward one side or the other. Most of the Jedi gravitated toward the Ashlar, the light side, as they came to recognize that balance in the Force was only achievable through its supremacy, but others, influenced by the Rakata, gravitated instead toward the Bogan, believing it would grant them greater power. The two sides clashed in the Force Wars of Tython, which lasted for about a decade. The followers of Ashlar eventually defeated the followers of Bogan, and in the aftermath of the conflict, they formed the Jedi Order, dedicated to ensuring the supremacy of the light and thus the balance of the Force. But despite the Jedi victory, the Force Wars took their toll on Tython. Since the planet and its ecosystem was so heavily attuned to the Force Wars wreaked havoc across its surface, and the Jedi were forced to abandon it, as it was barely even inhabitable at that point. Using Rakatan Force-attuned hyperdrives, they traveled across the galaxy and settled on Ossus. Ossus was a unique world that reminded the Jedi of Tython in its prime, a world of natural beauty and astrological uniqueness. Located in the Adiga system, Ossus had two suns, Adiga Prime and Adiga Besh, and unusually, it orbited them in a figure-8 pattern. When the Republic discovered Ossus in 25,000 BBY, they made their first official contact with the Jedi Order. The Jedi Knights had been known to the Republic beforehand, as a few had fought in the Unification Wars, but they were mostly treated as beings of legend, and it wasn't until contact was made with Ossus that the legends were confirmed. While their basic precepts were the same, the Jedi Order of 25,000 BBY was quite different from the Jedi Order of the movie era. The Jedi were always in favor of the light side. Their High Council was in place from the beginning, and their ranks and many of their traditions were present in the earliest incarnations of the Order. But in general, the Jedi Order of those times were far less rigid than it would eventually become. The ancient Jedi were allowed to have families, for example, and their temple on Ossus was less of a headquarters and more of a gathering site. Furthermore, they had not yet invented their iconic lightsabers. Instead, they used specially forged swords imbued with the Force, which made them sharper, more durable, and more in tune with the user. Some Jedi welcomed ties with the Republic and immediately began traveling to Republic worlds, seeking to maintain peace and justice. Others were more skeptical, however, so the Order debated whether or not to officially join the Republic for weeks. But ultimately, after revered Jedi Master Huan Tia toured the Republic and was satisfied with what he saw, the Order did in fact choose to officially ally itself with the Republic. From that point forwards, the Jedi Knights served as the guardians of peace and justice across the Republic, a role they would continue to fulfill in various ways for the next 25,000 years. Many Jedi settled on worlds across the Republic as permanent protectors and sages, becoming Jedi Watchmen, while others largely remained on Ossus, which became a fortress world of the Republic, serving to protect it from the threats of the Outer Rim. But ironically, the first real threat to the Republic that the Jedi fought off came from within the Jedi Order itself. By 24,500 BBY, the Jedi Order had comfortably settled into its place in the Republic, and its various doctrines became more rigid. The Jedi Council in particular was becoming more dogmatic, especially when it came to studying other Force traditions. A number of Jedi resented this, including one promising student named Zendor. Hoping to solve the problem, Zendor and his close friend Arden Lin asked the Council for permission to start a satellite academy far from Ossus, where they would study a variety of other Force traditions alongside the Jedi ways. The Council shot this idea down, but Zendor and Lin left to start their satellite academy anyway, taking a large number of followers with them. They settled on Leto, a world on the borders of the Deep Core that was pretty much on the opposite end of the Republic. On Leto, Xendor founded an academy where he was quickly joined by thousands of Jedi renunciates and other Force sensitives. They operated similarly to the Jedi, but with a much less rigid hierarchy and a strong emphasis on individualism, in contrast to what they viewed as the collectivist ways of the Jedi. At first, Xendor's teachings were a mix of a wide variety of Force traditions, but they gradually became dominated by the study of the Bogan, the dark side of the Force. Xendor and his followers became enthralled by the darkness, as the Jedi Council had feared, so the Jedi began gathering on Ossus, fearing Xendor would become a threat to the Republic. In turn, Xendor and his followers began to militarize, naming themselves the Legions of Leto. As the Jedi began openly building an army in Ossus, Xendor, now the general of the Legions of Leto, believed war was inevitable. Hoping to end it before it began, he struck first, launching an attack on Ossus that the Order easily repelled. The Jedi beat the Legions of Leto back to the Polemian in short order, bringing the war to the core worlds, the heart of the fledgling Republic. This war became known as the First Great Schism. Battles were fought between the Jedi and the legions of Brental IV, Trandrila, Koralag, Metalos, and even Coruscant itself. The outcome of these battles is unknown, but it can be assumed the Jedi won all or most of them. And though both the Jedi and the legions claimed that they were trying to defend the Republic generally stayed out of it. In short order, the Jedi Knights pushed the legions of the Polemian down the Corellian Run, cornering Xendor on Colomus, a world that was close to Leto. On Colomus, Xendor and some of his best legionnaires, including the likes of Sethel Asiage and Tun Bohoi, stood against the armies of Adrista Pina, nicknamed the Green Blade, the leader of the Jedi armies and a legendary warrior. Xendor and the legions fought well, but the Jedi had a crucial advantage, one that allowed them to win the prior battles of the Schism: battle meditation. That rare Jedi technique allowed generals like Pina to coordinate entire armies through the Force, and in the First Great Schism, his forces surrendered themselves entirely to his direction, creating a sort of battle meld that allowed the armies of the Jedi to fight as a singular unit. Xendor and his followers were disgusted by this, viewing it as insectile and a surrendering of individuality, and refused to do the same. As a result, they were slaughtered, and Xendor himself died at Pina's hands. The Jedi then launched an attack on Leto, in which Xendor's academy was destroyed, as were most of his followers. Only Arden Lin, his right hand, escaped, fleeing into the unknown, into which Adrista Pina pursued her. Neither were seen or heard from for the next 25,000 years, and with the destructions of the legions of Leto, the First Great Schism came to a close. The conflict was more or less forgotten in short order. Even though it was technically a full-scale war, it was quite small in scale, as both the Jedi Order and the legions of Leto were only a few thousand strong each, and the battles between them were small and quick. The Republic pretty much ignored the whole thing, while the Jedi willfully let it fade into legend. By the time of the Clone Wars, it was pretty much a myth. Only Xendor's name was remembered from the period, and even then, it was remembered only as profanity, an ignoble legacy for a guy who really wasn't all that bad. In the aftermath of the First Great Schism, the Republic kept expanding and the Jedi kept protecting it, righting small-scale wrongs and generally ensuring safety and stability. However, only a few hundred years later, the Jedi would be called into action en masse once more, as the Republic faced its first real threat, the Tyrannese. The Clone Wars, in many ways, were less one big conflict than they were a collection of thousands of more local grievances flaring up once more. Some, like the conflict between the Andoan Spivarolda and the Andoan Free Colonies, began only a few decades before the Clone Wars, but some were a continuation of truly ancient grievances which had troubled the Republic many times before. The Tion cluster's animosity toward the Republic is perhaps the most notable of these conflicts, and in this video, which is part of our series on the history of the Republic, we're going to explore what led to that region becoming the heart of the CIS. In our last video in the series, we discussed how the Jedi Order came to be affiliated with Coruscant and ended with the First War breakout in the Republic. But that war, the First Great Schism, was limited in scale and the Republic was barely even involved in it. Instead, the Republic's first true war happened 500 years earlier, in around 24,000 BBY. At that time, Republic hyperspace scouts were eagerly pushing along the Polemian trade route into the Outer Rim, seeking new civilizations to trade with. There was a danger in doing so, of course. Upon joining the Republic, the Jedi of Ossus warned that pirates and bloodthirsty empires lay not far from the borders of the Republic, and actually joined the Republic mostly to help insulate it from those dangers. But this didn't deter the Republic's scouts, and soon enough, they discovered the Tiernese. At the time, the Galactic Republic was still rather naive, possessing no real military aside from the small fleets maintained by some of the richer core worlds. Its scout ships were only lightly armed, and when they first made contact with the Tiernese, they did so in the hopes of establishing trade with their new neighbors. The Tiernese, on the other hand, were a completely different story. The Tiernese were human, the descendants of a pair of ancient sleeper ship colonies that were established on Barseg and Janalis 7, 2,000 years before the Republic was even an idea. They adopted old Rakartan technology discovered on those worlds, coming up with primitive hyperdrives, war droids, and beam tubes, the ancient ancestors of the modern blaster. They quickly spread out across the Tion cluster, a large swath of space in the distant Outer Rim. They quickly splintered into a variety of warring civilizations, but they nonetheless managed to maintain a somewhat universal culture. 25,150 years before the Battle of Yavin, Tiernese civilization had become dominated by three warring factions. The Livian League, ruled from Decivero, the Kingdom of Barseg, ruled from Barseg, and the Kingdom of Kron, ruled from Chandar. Around that time, the Kingdom of Kron came under the rule of the infamous pirate king Zur VII, who executed a series of campaigns known as the Kronese Sweeps. He conquered the Kingdom of Barseg and a massive swath of the cluster beyond it, with only the Livian League remaining independent of his rule. Zur moved the capital of his new empire to Argai and divided it into three provinces, ruled by Shandar, Kadinth, and Raxus. 25,130 years before the Battle of Yavin, Zur died and was succeeded by his son Zim, who was determined to expand his father's empire. He was tremendously successful. Not only did he conquer the Livian League, but he also greatly expanded the borders of the Tiernese civilization, and by 25,100 BBY, Zim's empire was the largest state in the entire galaxy. Rule of the empire was divided between Zim's throne worlds, the richest and most powerful of the Tiernese worlds. Within the original borders of the Tion cluster, he chose Argai, Chandar, Kadinth, and Decivero as his seats of power, and as the empire expanded, new throne worlds were added. As Zim pushed into the region known as the Thanium worlds, which stretched out to the Radama Void, and far Indrexu, which lay rimward of the cluster, Thanium and Yatusk joined the list of throne worlds. When he conquered the lush region known as the Kyrium Reaches, Horonom and Astigon became throne worlds as well. And Zim didn't stop there, he was always pushing the borders of his realm. Unfortunately for him, he largely chose to push them southwards. As Zim's empire reached southwards across the rim, it eventually encountered another powerful civilization, the Hutt Empire. In his arrogance, Zim saw the Hutts as ripe for the conquest and declared war, claiming Sleheron as his 9th throne world and engaging the Hutts in several battles at the planet of Ontor. But Zim underestimated his wily enemies. In preparation for the 3rd Battle of Ontor, the Hutts enslaved 3 entire species, the Niktos, Clatunians, and Vodrans, and formed them into huge armies, which they unleashed against Zim's war droids in that last fateful battle. The Hutts were victorious, and the being history would remember as Zim the Despot was captured and humiliated, dying a slave in a Hutt dungeon. Following Zim's defeat, his empire splintered, with the Hutts claiming many of their southern territories for their own and frequently raiding the rest for slaves and plunder. The Tierney's splinter states, which included the Honourable Union of Decivero and Tion, the Jamanier Marchers, the Kingdom of Kron, the Thanium Dominion, the Indrexu Confederation, and the Keldrath Alignment, were constantly seeking to return to their former glory and take revenge on the Hutts. But the Hutts themselves remained far from Tierney's reach, and they were always sure to send sinister war fleets to mess up any Tierney's civilization that got too powerful for their liking. The Hutts were still unknown to the Republic when they encountered the Tierney's, but news of the contact made its way to Hutt ears. The Hutts feared that two human civilizations would unite against them, so in 24,500 BBY, they attacked the Kyrium Reaches, the southernmost Tierney's colonies, without warning in a campaign known as the Devouring. This genocidal war saw the Kyrium Reaches utterly annihilated, stripped of all inhabitants and thoroughly plundered. When Republic scouts eventually reached the region, they named it the Ash Worlds. The Tierney's were still reeling from this genocide in 24,000 BBY, and as they began to learn more about the Republic, they saw an opportunity. The Republic was wealthy and technologically advanced, with better hyperdrive technology than either the Tierney's or the Hutts. Despite this, however, it didn't have a standing military, so some among the Tierney's hoped to conquer it and use its technology to exact revenge on the Hutts. Decivero led this effort, getting the Honourable Union on board with the idea and then making alliances with the Kingdom of Kron, the Jamanier Marchers, and the Thanium Dominion as well. They reverse-engineered Republic technology and began building new war fleets at Arkan, Jamanier, and Thanium. Somehow, the Republic didn't see war coming, even when the Jedi repeatedly warned them about it. The Senate did absolutely nothing until, in 24,000 BBY, the Tierney's stormed down the Polemian trade route, first conquering Abheen and then Roche, Lantiles, Tanab, and Tiran. Frantically, the Republic began cobbling together a military, but it did so much too late, and the Tierney's breached the core worlds before their new warships were ready. Using devastating pressure bombs, the Tierney's destroyed the shipyards of Polemia and Axum, and then proceeded to unleash their new weapons on Alsaken and Coruscant itself. Their assaults were devastating, but not crippling, and the Republic quickly prepared for a counterattack. At Corellia, Rendelia, and Humberine, vast fleets of warships were nearing completion, the first vessels to be put to use as part of the new Republic Navy. The Tierney's foothold in the heart of the Republic was weak from the beginning, as their tactics were still based on those pioneered by Zim the Despot, who took inspiration primarily from his time as a pirate. As a result, the Tierney's focused more on plundering than they did on actually securing territory, and so when the Republic finally executed its counterattack, the Tierney's were routed and quickly pushed out of the core. Emboldened, the Republic Navy rallied at Anaxis, Axum's sister world, and began pursuing the Tierney's back up the Polemian. The Tierney's war lasted for 100 years, most of which was a series of back and forth campaigns between the Tion and the core. Over the course of this period, Anaxis, now the headquarters of the Republic Navy, gained a reputation as the defender of the core, as the Tierney's were never again successful in getting past it and into the Republic at large. Fleets launched from Anaxis pushed the Tierney's further and further up the Polemian as the Republic pulled its industrial resources to build up its new military. As both the Republic and the Tierney's turned the Polemian worlds into war camps and entrenched their armies, the Senate sought out other ways to get an advantage over the Tierney's. Republic merchants with contacts in Hutt vassal colonies managed to provoke the Hutt Empire into a new campaign against the Tion, which forced the Tierney's to redirect some of their forces to defend their southern borders. After a lengthy debate, the Jedi Order also decided to get involved in the war, concerned that the galaxy would sink into barbarism otherwise. As the Tierney's were slowly pushed back, their war effort became fanatical, for they came to believe that defeat would mean the destruction of their culture and civilization. Their tactics came to incorporate sudden raids and even suicide attacks, which in turn further radicalized the Republic military, which adopted a strategy of total war. They eventually pushed the Tierney's back out into the Tion cluster, which they then invaded, using their own pressure bombs to annihilate Kadinth, Jamanier, Thanium, Chandar, and Barsek. At last, in 23,900 BBY, the Republic Navy attacked Decivero itself. Knowing they faced defeat, The Decevras offered an unconditional surrender, a surrender the Republic ignored. Seeking to send a message to the Tiernese, they pressure-bombed the entire planet, blasting it into a barren wasteland. In short order, the rest of the Tiernese world surrendered, and the Tiernese War ended with a Republic victory. There was some blowback to the brutality expressed at Decevero, however. The Jedi nearly broke ties with the Republic entirely over it, and to placate them, the Senate ordered the complete dissolution of the Republic Navy, with its assets being distributed to individual worlds to maintain. Over the course of the centuries that followed the end of the Tiernese War, the worlds of the Tion cluster ended up joining the Republic to seek protection from the Hutts, with only Decevero remaining bitterly independent. Over the course of the next few thousand years, the Republic continued to expand. It pushed further into the colonies, further out along the Corellian Run, and into the Inner Rim. Worlds like Deveron, Alantine 6, Aelon, Ansar, Pantalomin, and Shambhala joined the Republic. The Republic made contact with other civilizations out in the void as well, making alliances with Noain and the Tilak regions. The map you're seeing now is the Republic as it was by 22,000 BBY, during the height of the expansionist era. By 20,000 BBY, much of the core, the colonies, and the Inner Rim had seen intensive exploration, and a new chapter of Republic history began, the Great Manifest period. By that point, the Tiernese War were thousands of years in the past, and the Tion cluster had been completely absorbed into the Republic. But not all of the Tiernese were happy about it. Anti-Republic sentiment lingered in the Tion cluster for tens of thousands of years after that initial conflict. And in the Republic's later wars, the Tion often leapt at any opportunity to secede from the Republic. The Clone Wars were one such conflict. In 24 BBY, when Count Dooku announced the formation of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, he did so on Raxus Prime in the Tion cluster, which became the first sector to secede during the subsequent Separatist crisis. The Clone Wars tore the Galactic Republic apart on an unprecedented scale due to the secession of countless thousands of member systems. Before that, the Republic had largely ruled the galaxy undisputed for thousands of years, with the only major exceptions most fans know of being during the wars with the Sith. But was the Clone Wars the first civil war the Republic faced? The answer, in fact, is no. In this fourth installment of our Republic History series, we're going to be taking a look at the first civil war that split the Republic, and why the galaxy was never the same again. By the end of the expansionist era, the Republic had fully explored and incorporated large swaths of the core worlds, the colonies, and the Inner Rim, and was developing further out into the galactic disk along the Polemian trade route and the Corellian Run. With the conquest of the Tion cluster, the Republic stretched out far into the Rim along the Polemian Run, and by 20,000 BBY, the Corellian Run had been heavily developed as well. At that point in time, explorers were instead turning their attention to the wide chunk of space between the two routes, a region nicknamed the Slice. Starting in 20,000 BBY, scouts began pouring into the Slice, heralding the beginning of a new chapter in Republic history, the Great Manifest period. This period saw the Republic expand dramatically, both in astrographic and bureaucratic terms. It was during this period that many of the Republic's most infamous flaws, including its massively convoluted bureaucratic process and constant Senate gridlock, began to take root, as Republic space was expanding faster than the Senate could keep up with it. As a result, many sectors were far larger than they were legally supposed to be, limiting representation for newer colonies. This era also saw the creation of the Bureau of Ships and Services in 18,000 BBY, a powerful organization that controlled hyperspace navigation across the entirety of galactic civilization. Galactic exploration during the Great Manifest period was largely pushed by three powerful core worlds in particular: Coruscant, Alsaken, and Corellia. Coruscant, the Republic capital and hub of galactic civilization, coordinated the exploration of the Slice from the Corellian Run, of which it was the endpoint, discovering many new species and welcoming them into the Republic. Corellia pushed into the wild space south of the core, while Alsaken funded colonization efforts northwards from the Polemian trade spine. Significant cultural differences emerged between the worlds explored by Alcican, those explored by Coruscant, and those explored by Corellia, resulting in the early Republic developing not as one civilization, but as three. By the end of the Great Manifest period, shortly before 17,000 BBY, the Republic was significantly larger than it had been at the end of the expansionist era. However, it was beginning to fracture as a result of these tensions. Alcican, the home of a proud people with a distinct culture, had been Coruscant's biggest rival in the years before the Republic. They had wanted the Republic to be more of a confederation, a looser union than it eventually became, fearing their culture would be lost otherwise. As the Great Manifest period went on and the Republic became more consolidated and bureaucratic, the Alcicani began to see these fears coming true. Alcican itself was becoming just another stop on the Polemian, a rest point between Coruscant and Anaxis. As a result, Alcican was constantly trying to upstage Coruscant, dominating colonization efforts along the Polemian trade route, which the Alcicani called the Axis. Alcicani explorers pushed the borders of wild space in the slice southwards, discovering worlds like Seleucami and Laurel, and they also funded northwards expansion of the Republic, colonizing Palanhi, Bogdan, Obraskai, and Sirocco. That latter region, the northern dependencies, became particularly loyal to Alcican, and many Polemian worlds, including the Tyon cluster, came to reflect Alcicani views on the Republic as well. Coruscant, meanwhile, took advantage of the expansion of the Corellian run, which by that point stretched out to Mon Gaza in the Mid-Rim, and had reached the vital trade worlds of Cherba and Pakwapor Minor as well. The Grand Companies, a group of corporations on Coruscant and Coruscant loyal worlds along the Spin, the stretch of the Corellian run between Corellia and Coruscant, dominated the colonization process, which they used to exploit newly discovered worlds. From Mon Gaza, Coruscanti and Corellian explorers pushed into the Outer Rim, discovering Geonosis, Shimba, and Manda in the space beyond the end of the run. They also made contact with other spacefaring civilizations, including the Bothans and the Lenik. More importantly, however, they pushed northwards into the slice, opening up the expansion region and then the Mid-Rim. Thousands of worlds were discovered by the Coruscant-backed scout ships, with notable ones including Umbara, Belasco, Telti, Cerealia, and New Absalon. Many of the worlds discovered in the expansion region were rich in natural resources, and so the Grand Companies took control of these planets and began stripping them. Critics began calling one particular swath of the expansion region the exploitation region because of how badly the corporations were treating the systems there. Indeed, many of the worlds were exploited so badly that they were rendered unable to support life and were subsequently abandoned. By the time of the Clone Wars, the exploitation region was considered dead space, with few habitable worlds and even fewer hyperspace routes left in the area. Corellia, meanwhile, just kind of did its own thing south of the Corellian run. It, too, had significant cultural influence over the Republic, with a stretch of the run known as the 77 sectors, and pretty much all systems south of the route taking after Corellia on most matters. Unlike Alcican though, it wasn't really bothered by the Republic expansion or Coruscant's growing dominance. The Corellians just stuck to doing what they did best, exploring. As Coruscant began to slowly take over the Corellian run, the Corellians began forging a new hyperspace route, the Corellian Trade Spine, which they extended from its former endpoint at Deveron far out into wild space. They settled the region between the run and the Trade Spine, and they also pushed out into the southern core, eventually coming up against the borders of the Herglic Trade Empire. By the end of the 17,000s, exploration was beginning to slow down, and the Great Manifest period was coming to a close. This heightened tensions between Alcican and Coruscant as the Republic began to seek greater authority over Alcicani colonies. Things finally came to a head in 17,018 BBY, when Alcican and its allies sent fleets south into the expansion region, claiming several resource-rich systems and blocking the Grand Company's expansion path. The Grand Company sent a fleet of heavily armed Duros merchant freighters in response, which opened fire on the Alcicani warships above several colonies. The Republic, following Coruscant's lead, resolved to officially support the Duros, and a civil war began. Thus, the Great Manifest period came to an end, and the Indector era began, starting with the first Alsacan conflict. In total, there were 17 Alsacan conflicts between 17,018 BBY and 3017 BBY, though we'll only be discussing the first two today. These were the first civil wars faced by the Republic, though they weren't the sort of civil war we're familiar with. Instead of drawn-out campaigns and extended periods of bloody infighting, the Alsacan conflicts mostly consisted of saber-rattling, with a few notable battles here and there. The Republic largely continued on as usual during them, with the many neutral systems serving as bridges between the warring parties, and thus leaving business mostly unaffected. The first Alsacan conflict saw several clashes between various Republic fleets and Alsacani warships, beginning with the Republic invasion of Virajansi, a world that, at the time, was occupied by Alsacan. The Republic successfully captured Virajansi, but Alsacan reclaimed the world in a second battle 6 years later, from which its warships would continue to launch raids on the exploitation region. After the battles of Virajansi, what started as a small-scale conflict between Alsacan and Coruscant's Spin allies dragged more and more systems into it, with the northernmost parts of the civilized galaxy largely siding with Alsacan and the rest of the Republic siding with Coruscant. Corellia, however, remained neutral, and the parts of the Republic south of the Corellian Run sided with it, forming the Corellian hegemony. There was only one full-scale battle in this centuries-long first Alsacan conflict, the Battle of Kess in 16,921 BBY, an orbital clash above the Sol system unfortunate enough to lie between Coruscant and Alsacan on the Polemian. That battle ended in a draw, as orbital minefields made that part of space impossible to navigate, thwarting Republic plans to attack Alsacan directly and end the conflict. 40 years later, Republic-backed merchant fleets besieged the Alsacani colony of Porus Vita, ultimately conquering the world for the Republic. The Alsacani responded in kind in around 16,800 BBY with the siege of Belasco, an unsuccessful attempt to conquer what was then one of the most crucial hyperspace junctions in the expansion region. The first Alsacan conflict dragged on like a crappy hollow drama the producers just wouldn't cancel, ending in 16,700 BBY, only because the Bureau of Ships and Services threatened to withhold navigational data from warships if it didn't. Coruscant and Alsacan worked out the Chalet Compromise in a bid to diminish tensions, which granted established Republic worlds more power in the Senate. This brought peace for a little while, but it also worsened the Senate corruption, which in turn led to war breaking out again just 500 years later. The second Alsacan conflict picked up where the first had left off, with the Alsacani attempting a second siege of Porus Vita in about 16,100 BBY, unsuccessfully trying to reclaim their lost colony. The Republic responded by pressing its advantage, beginning the Geyser campaign, which advanced from Porus Vita toward Geyser, an Alsacani stronghold on the Polemian. The Republic made some gains, but the Alsacani still managed to maintain control of Geyser itself in a series of skirmishes that concluded the campaign in 16,000 BBY. Most of the second Alsacan conflict consisted of an arms race, with a period of 400 years having no notable battles or clashes of any kind. This period ended about 15,600 years before the Battle of Yavin, with Alsacan's core campaigns, in which fleets of Alsacani warships advanced toward Republic-held Coruscant, Skako, and Kommenor. Alsacan was quickly pushed back by Republic forces at Skako and Kommenor, and the Republic kept the Alsacani from attacking Coruscant in a battle at Belgoth's Beacon, a historical site that was one of the Republic's first hyperspace beacons. Belgoth's Beacon was destroyed in the battle, becoming one of the many historical treasures that, regrettably, would be lost in the conflicts. Shortly afterwards, in 15,500 BBY, the second Alsacan conflict was put on pause when hyperspace scouts discovered Dwinalgwin, a reptilian species commonly known as star dragons, near Mokana in the Tyon cluster. Upon encountering a race of 50-meter-long dragon-like creatures that could survive in space and breathe atomic fire, the scouts naturally freaked out, unintentionally starting the Dwialgwin contention. The scouts ran all the way back to Coruscant, and hundreds of star dragons followed. They ravaged Galactic City, but Supreme Chancellor Felorian was able to put a stop to this destruction and negotiate peace with the star dragon philosopher Bors Mator. The contention ended with the Star Dragons peacefully acknowledging the Republic, and the Second Alcican conflict continued, though not for long. The last major strike in the second conflict was the Strontium raid of 15,480 BBY, in which Alcican attempted to capture Abion, a Republic-loyal world on the Polemian. The strike was unsuccessful and the second Alcican conflict fizzled out in around 15,400 BBY. As the Indector era came to a close around 15,000 BBY, tensions from the second Alcican conflict still simmered. These two conflicts were the first civil wars the Republic ever faced, but not the last. Alcican and Coruscant would continue to clash, leading to long-standing prejudices and rivalries to develop between their worlds. Some of these prejudices would later blossom into conflicts of the Clone Wars, the long-term consequence of the first Alcicani secessions. As the Republic continued to expand, the Alcican conflicts continued, even as explorers from both Alcican and Coruscant began to reach the borders of another civilization out in the unknown, the Hutt Empire. Jabba the Hutt was said to have lived by a simple axiom: too much of a good thing is never, ever enough. This mentality was shared by most members of his species, the bloated, slug-like Hutts, who are one of the wealthiest and most powerful races in the galaxy. Virtually all of this wealth and power was ill-begotten, a result of criminal activity and ancient imperial conquests. Their greed and ambition knew no bounds, and thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin, these traits led them to concoct a plan to take over the known galaxy. We'll be discussing that plot and the Republic's equally abhorrent response to it. Our story resumes where it left off at the end of the last episode, in 15,000 BBY, at the end of the Indector era. Up to that point in time, despite some early civil wars, the Republic had managed to insulate itself from major threats, as most of the civilizations it encountered only spanned a few star systems at most. However, as the Indector era ended and the Chimodon era began, that was about to change. By 15,000 BBY, the Republic had made contact with several alien civilizations that had neglected to join it, including the Bothans of Bothawui, the Nautilans of Glianselm, and the Zabraks of Iridonia. Taiwanese explorers told tales of the distant alien world Salin, while Republic scouts started to push further into the slice. But the Republic was also coming up on the borders of two major alien empires, the Herglic Trade Empire and the Hutt Empire. The Herglic Trade Empire controlled a large swath of the southern core, just off the Republic's western border. From their homeworld of Giju, the whale-like Herglics had influence over many civilizations, including Abrogado Array, the Dolfirm Planet States, and the Botor Enclave. The Herglics were powerful, wealthy, and highly advanced, having first taken to the stars 2,000 years before the Republic's formation. Fortunately for the Republic, they were also quite friendly. They had known the Republic since its formation thanks to regular trade with the Duros, and the Republic had little to fear from contact with them. The Hutts, however, were another story entirely. Like the Herglic Trade Empire, the Hutt Empire was founded long before the Republic, and it grew to be quite wealthy and powerful, having enslaved entire species over the years. Ruled from the ancient Hutt homeworld of Val, the Hutt Empire had been known to the Republic since the Taiwanese War in 24,000 BBY. As the Republic pushed further into the Rim, it was cautious of this distant empire of gluttonous slugs, unwilling to come into conflict with them. The Hutt Empire, meanwhile, didn't bother much with the Republic, at least while the Republic's colonies were still far from its borders. When Republic settlers started colonizing worlds closer to Hutt space, however, the Hutts responded with raids, slaughtering or enslaving the populations of entire planets. Though both sides stopped short of a full-scale war, a confrontation between the two great civilizations became inevitable. Fortunately for the Republic, the Hutt Empire imploded before that could happen. 15,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Hutt Empire tore itself apart in a civil war called the Hutt Cataclysms. For unknown reasons, Hutt clans turned terrible weapons against each other, reducing some of their most ancient colonies to lifeless wastes. Worst of all, the Cataclysms claimed Val itself, which had its atmosphere vaporized and surface obliterated. Greatly weakened, the surviving Hutts regrouped at the planet Evokar, which they renamed Nal Hutta, and attempted to cobble together a new civilization. With the Hutt Empire gone, the Republic experienced another period of booming expansion, much like the earlier Great Manifest period. But the Hutts had led the Republic to develop a greater sense of caution about colonization efforts, leading to the re-establishment of the Republic Navy in 15,000 BBY. In its first few years of service, the new navy proved itself in border conflicts at Kolbon, Essaga, and the Sundered Vale Nebula, as well as in a brief war against the Aquilish of Ando. It also kept Republic borders safe during the Herglic Crush of 14,743 BBY, a civil war within the Herglic Trade Empire. Following the Herglic Crush, there were concerns within the Republic about whether peace with the Trade Empire would last. But these fears were assuaged in around 13,000 BBY when the Herglics and their empire decided to join the Republic. Of course, the Kaimudon era wasn't all fun and games. Starting in 14,500 BBY, the Third Alsacan conflict began, which saw Coruscant loyal Republic forces attack Alsacani allied worlds in the Comenor Run campaign, hitting Katadar, Alderaan, and finally Tapassi before attacking Alsacan itself, destroying the city of Rupaka. That conflict ended in 14,300 BBY, after which there was peace for about 500 years. A fourth Alsacan conflict followed from 13,800 to 13,200 BBY, shortly after which a fifth Alsacan conflict erupted in 13,050 BBY. That conflict was focused around the northern dependencies, the Republic colonies north of Coruscant, which had been largely settled by Alsacan. In that conflict, Alsacani Admiral Hyrkin, equipped with a fleet of brand new cruisers, commanded a furious defense of these colonies, routing Republic forces at Borlius, Twith, Zafel, Dakut, Gli Anselm, and Iridonia. His efforts ended the conflict in Alsacan's favor in 12,700 BBY. This was just in time because the Republic was starting to have real problems right about then. Proper contact was finally being established with the Hutts, as Republic scouts had blazed a hyperspace lane, the Utmian Pabol, from Jindain to Nal Hutta itself, the Hutts' new homeworld. This contact renewed concerns about the Hutts, and not without reason. After the loss of Val, the Hutts had moved to Evokar, which they brought piecemeal from the native Evokai through a series of scams. After taking the planet, which was renamed Nal Hutta, they all but exterminated the Evokai. Inspired by this new method of conquest, the Hutt leader, Budila Hestelik Amura, instituted a philosophy called Kajidik. In line with Kajidik, the Hutts put an end to the old imperial ways, eschewing military conquest in favor of achieving economic control over planets and organizations. This ultimately led to the formation of the Hutt Cartel, which became a powerful force in the galactic black market. By the time of the forging of the Utmian Pabol, the Hutts and their black market had become wealthy and powerful enough to infiltrate the Republic itself. The Hutts wanted to take over the Republic, but not militarily. Rather, they sought to seize control of the Republic's economy and thus indirectly conquer the galaxy from within. From the beginning, the Hutts were met with success. The Galactic Senate was already corrupt, and the Hutts were easily able to corrupt it much further to their own benefit. But the growing corruption and gridlock in the Republic had an unintended side effect. It led to the rise of a religion called the Pius Dea. Centered around the worship of an entity called only the Goddess, Pius Dea became popular among the humans of the core worlds due to its emphasis on purity, internal policing, and the purging of unsavory elements within communities. However, the religion had a dark underside to it. Pius Dea was violently humanocentrist, deeming virtually all alien species as impure and lesser in comparison to humans. In 11,987 BBY, a Pius Dea conspiracy in the Galactic Senate saw the corrupt Bothan Supreme Chancellor, Pers Ilya, impeached and assassinated, with Constipex I, a Pius Dea adherent, rising to replace him. So began the Pius Dea era, a dark time for the Republic. Over the course of the next few decades, Contis Pex transformed the Republic into a theocracy, handing over virtually all important government positions to members of the Pius Dea hierarchy. Those of you who have seen our previous video on this era know what came next. In 11,965 BBY, Contis Pex declared war on the Hutts, sparking the first of the 34 Pius Dea Crusades. These horrible, genocidal wars between the Pius Dea Republic and various alien civilizations dominated the next millennium, as millions of human soldiers crowded onto cathedral ships and stormed alien worlds with cries of "the goddess wills it." Under the guidance of Contis Pex I and his successors, who all took the name Contis Pex in his honor, they wiped out entire species and ruined the civilizations of many more, carrying their wealth and resources back to the core aboard galleons. The first few Pius Dea Crusades were directed against the Hutts, as the Hutts were widely hated in the Republic. In the first, second, third, and fourth Crusades, the Crusaders pushed the Hutts back rimward through wild space, slaughtering any non-humans they encountered along the way. The brutality these Crusaders showed in these early battles shocked many in the Republic. The Jedi Order, in particular, condemned the Crusaders' actions and cut ties with the Republic, withdrawing to Ossus and refusing to participate. Though they were, at that point, unwilling to actually battle the Republic they were sworn to protect. Of course, some Jedi Knights fought against the Crusaders anyway, while a few troubled souls joined them, falling to the dark side and becoming the Order of the Terrible Glare. After the first few Crusades, the Pius Dea turned their attention to other alien species. While aliens and alien-sympathetic humans were hunted down and branded heretics within the Republic, the military began attacking neighboring civilizations. In 11,884 BBY, the Great Northern Crusade, or the Seventh Crusade, saw bloody assaults on the Zabraks and the Ithorians, while the Crusade of the Wilds in 11,791 BBY, or the 10th Crusade, saw the genocide of various species living along the Salen corridor. Fortunately, not everyone in the Republic was keen to go along with this madness. In 11,820 BBY, the Alsacani finally did something useful in the 6th Alsacan conflict, during which they established lines of communication with the Duros, Hergliks, Hutts, and other alien species. The Alsacani offered these species covert protection from the Republic in the centuries that followed. The Pius Dea Crusades went on for nearly a full 1,000 years and featured many terrible atrocities. The 11th Crusade devastated Herglik space, while the 12th Crusade saw the Republic bomb the Zarasines of Zarasenia III and the Terrasens of Terrassa back into the Stone Age. Not every species the Pius Dea fought was wiped out, however. The Baragwin, the targets of the 15th Crusade, were able to weather the storm, as were the Bothans and Lennox, the targets of the 23rd Crusade. By 11,500 BBY, the Pius Dea dominated millions of worlds, a mix of human colonies and conquered alien worlds. Many of the remote colonies became ordnance/regional depots, or Ords for short, which were essentially naval fortress worlds. On these worlds, many of which retained the prefix Ord even to the modern era, the Pius Dea housed fleets of sinister cathedral ships, tasked with laying waste to any nearby alien civilizations perceived as a threat, alongside smaller man-o'-war vessels and primitive bywings. But despite the establishment of this well-oiled military machine, the Pius Dea's wars began to stall in around 11,100 BBY, likely due to a lack of good targets. As a result, the zealotry of the Pius Dea Republic turned inwards and a bloody series of inquisitions began. As the Republic tore itself to shreds, Kamasi diplomats finally convinced the Jedi Council to end their centuries-long recusal, and the Order entered into a conspiracy with the Kamasi, the Alsacani, and an alliance of other alien species. After the 34th Crusade in 11,057 BBY, they spread a secret heresy among the Pius Dea, allying with millions of renunciates in the military who were sick of all the cult garbage. In 10,967 BBY, these heretics declared themselves, sparking the Renunciation, a brutal civil war that was also known as the 7th Alsacan conflict. Under the leadership of the Jedi, The Renunciates, the Alcani and their alien allies waged war across the galaxy, smiting Pius Dea fleets at Ord Mirit, Ixtlar, Fondor, Ord Carida, and Cyrilia. Most of the Republic military defected to join the Renunciates, but the Pius Dea faithful nonetheless retained their fleets of cathedral ships and their Crusader armies. However, a year into the war, the cult was dealt a killing blow when the Bureau of Ships and Services sided with the Renunciates. The Bureau seeded every cathedral ship in the fleet with bad Navi computer data, forcing the ships to jump out into the middle of nowhere and then remotely disabling their hyperdrives. Most of the surviving Crusaders were left to starve in the void, as they damn well deserved. But the vanguard of the Pius Dea fleet was sent to Uquine, where it was routed by the Jedi and the Renunciates. After a team of Jedi Knights boarded the fleet's flagship, the Flame of Synthara, and captured Contispex 19, the Pius Dea finally collapsed. The cult was purged from the Republic, and its leaders were imprisoned for life. An uneasy period of rebuilding and reconciliation ensued, during which the Jedi all but took over the Republic in a bid to put it back together. They were unsuccessful in the end, but worse problems than the Pius Dea were soon to follow, as a new threat to the Republic blossomed within the Jedi Order itself. Ever since its beginning, the Jedi Order struggled with the dark side. It was born out of conflict with Darksiders in the Force Wars of Tython, and fought the legions of Leto, a group of Dark Jedi, in the First Schism shortly after the Republic's founding. But no dark side threat faced by the Order was as dangerous or as well known as the Dark Lords of the Sith. The Sith were the enemies of the Jedi for thousands of years, and the Great Wars fought between the two orders consumed the entire galaxy. In this week's entry in our series on the history of the Republic, we're going to be discussing the first of these terrible conflicts. When we last left the Republic, it wasn't doing too well. It was 10,966 years before the Battle of Yavin, and the galaxy was in chaos in the aftermath of the Pius Dea Crusades. The Crusaders had been defeated, their cathedral ships were adrift, lifeless, in the middle of nowhere, and Contispex 19, the last of their leaders, had been imprisoned for life on Kamas. The Jedi had led a coalition of renunciate heretics, Alcani and Corellian separatists, and non-human rebels to victory. But in the process, much of the Republic had been destroyed, and it needed to be rebuilt. Fortunately, the Jedi stepped into the power vacuum left by the Pius Dea and put the Republic back together. The Grand Master of the Order, Beald Octavius, replaced Contispex as the Supreme Chancellor, while the Jedi and Kamasi set about bridging divides between humans and non-humans all over the galaxy. Over the course of the Ductavis era, the Republic speedily recovered. By 10,000 BBY, it was ready to pick up where it had left off before the Pius Dea, continuing to expand and explore the galaxy. As explorers pushed the fringes of known space, a few more Alcani conflicts occurred, and some new external threats emerged as well. In around 10,000 BBY, the young conqueror, Val Kumori, conquered a few dozen planets on the edge of Republic space, declaring himself the ruler of the Kumori Empire. Normally, the Republic would just quietly eliminate hostile factions like his, like swatting a mosquito. But Kumori was a much more serious threat than the Republic usually faced. The Conqueror had a fleet of innovative new battleships equipped with powerful mass driver cannons, which took in asteroids and lobbed them at targets. These mass drivers could crack a warship in half with a single shot, and when fired at planets, they had the potential to devastate entire ecosystems. Despite his impressive new toys, Val Kumori was quickly defeated by the Republic Navy, and his empire was absorbed into the Republic. But the legacy of his mass drivers endured. The Republic Navy copied Kumori's designs, and mass drivers were used as terror weapons by both sides in the 10th Alcani conflict a few centuries later. They were particularly notorious for their role in the Osara Municide, in which the Republic Navy bombed Osara, an Alcani colony in the northern dependencies, to the point of lifelessness. This was the first equivalent of a base Delta Zero strike since the fall of the Rakata, and unfortunately, it was not the last either. It did, however, lead to more important technological developments. Planetary shields and turbo lasers were developed after the 10th Alsacane conflict, allowing planets to better defend themselves against bombardment in the future. The Ductavis era was followed up by the Narrators period, which lasted from 9000 to 8000 BBY. Remembered for the 275-year long reign of revered Supreme Chancellor Blotus the Hutt, the Narrators period saw the Republic expand southwards, discovering Malastare, and northwards, rounding off the northern dependencies. It was followed by the Subterra period, which lasted from 8000 to 7000 BBY, during which time the Republic faced several new threats. In 7811 BBY, Republic scout ships in the northern dependencies encountered the Waymancy Hollow, a small alliance of factions opposed to Republic expansion. These factions were diverse, including the Sisters of the Machinesmith, the mercenary army of Whirlpoint 6, the Nests of Neshtab, the Wives of Tengrippa, and a few other alien races. But they all had the same goal, the destruction of the Republic. To that end, they had spent 1,000 years studying Republic military technology, improving on it in every possible way. After the first contact between the Republic and the Waymancy Hollow, war began, and right away, the Republic was seriously outmatched. That war was later named the Waymancy Storm, as it was both quick and terribly destructive. Waymancy ships poured into Republic space, destroying colonies across the northern dependencies and annihilating entire fleets of Republic warships. But the Republic fought back. It had the advantage of numbers, and more importantly, it had the advantage of spirit. Volunteers from rimworlds affected by the conflict poured into the Republic military and fought the conquerors with unmatched courage. The Republic was able to grind the advance of Waymancy forces to a halt, and then, using Waymancy technology that had been reverse engineered in a secluded Axum shipyard, it began a counterattack. The battleships of the Republic Navy and the fearless rocket jumpers put an end to the Waymancy Storm by the end of the year, utterly destroying the Waymancy factions and conquering their worlds. The latest threat to the Republic was defeated, but a worse threat was just over the horizon. The Republic's greatest crisis came in 7003 BBY, this time from within. And no, we're not talking about another Alsacane conflict. This threat came from within the Jedi Order. Since the end of the Pius Day Crusades, the Jedi Order had flourished. In those days, thousands of Jedi Knights roamed the galaxy, serving as watchmen for isolated planets or wandering heroes. At the same time, Jedi Masters gathered on Ossus, studying the Force in the peaceful seclusion of the Order's homeworld. The light of the Jedi seemed brighter than ever, but as we all know, the brighter the light gets, the darker its shadow becomes. The dark side was spreading within the ranks of the Order itself, and its adherents were more numerous than they had been for over 10,000 years. These Dark Jedi declared themselves and broke away from the Order in 7003 BBY, beginning the Second Great Schism. The Dark Jedi fled into wild space following their exile from the Order, and at first, the Jedi on Ossus were content to leave them there. But then reports began to trickle in about these Darksiders and what they were doing with their newfound powers. They had fallen so far into the Darkside's embrace that they had begun to use their powers to warp life itself, to use alchemy to mutate living creatures into terrible abominations bound to their will. The Dark Jedi had created the first of what would later be called Sith spawn. On top of this, they were attempting to take their powers a step further, studying how to use the dark side to mutate other sentients and extend their lives indefinitely. This left the Jedi with no choice. They had to go to war to stop their fallen brothers and the nightmarish monsters they were creating. Unlike in the First Great Schism, in which the rest of the galaxy took no part, the Jedi received the backing of the Republic military in this conflict. With both the full might of the Jedi Order and the Republic set against them, it seemed that the Dark Jedi would be easily defeated. Things weren't as they seemed, however. The Dark Jedi had known war was coming ever since their exile, and in the years before the war broke out, they had amassed a vast army of monsters. Unlike the last Great Schism, this war between Jedi wasn't over in a few months or even a few years. It lasted a full century, from 7,000 to 6,900 BBY, coming to be known as the 100-Year Darkness. In those terrible years, light and dark clashed all over the galaxy. Jedi and Dark Jedi fought in ferocious proto-saber duels, while entire colonies were consumed by battles between the Republic army and vast hordes of huge monsters and dark side zombies. Dark Jedi proved to be more relentless than their enemies had bargained for, always fighting to the death. To make matters worse, their ranks were constantly bolstered by new defectors from within the Jedi Order. Despite this, the Jedi and the Republic initially had the advantage. The armies gathered by the rogues were animalistic and reckless, and after the initial shock of the first few battles, the forces of light had an easy time dispatching them. The Dark Jedi were pushed back beyond the frontier, and their numbers were slowly whittled down. Unwilling to give up, they responded by creating the worst monsters yet, the Leviathans. These massive reptilian beasts feasted on the souls of their victims, storing their life forces and accumulated knowledge in blister traps on their backs. The Dark Jedi unleashed them upon the galaxy, and so began a counterattack. But in the end, the Leviathans only bought the Dark Jedi a few decades. The Jedi recovered, and with the help of the Republic, they pushed the Darksiders back once again. Leviathans fell one by one to proto-sabers and Waymancy-designed turbo lasers, and the numbers of Dark Jedi began to dwindle. By 6,900 BBY, 100 years into the war, the Dark Jedi had been pushed back to the remote mining world Korbos, where they prepared for a last stand. The Battle of Korbos was the most terrible battle of the 100-Year Darkness. The cornered Dark Jedi unleashed the last of their monsters and Leviathans against the Jedi and their allies, killing thousands. But in the end, the Darksiders were only delaying the inevitable. After the last of their ships were destroyed in orbit, the Republic Navy used battleships based on Kumori designs to bombard Korbos from orbit, wiping out most of the remaining Dark Jedi and their monsters. Only 12 of their greatest champions survived, including the sorceress Sorceress Sin, the formidable General Zozan, the gifted Admiral Remulus Dryper, the cunning warrior Karnes Moore, and Ajunta Pal, their leader. The Republic wanted to publicly execute these Dark Jedi, but the Jedi Order refused. The Jedi marched the Darksiders onto a drone-operated galleon and shot them out into the Great Beyond, hoping they would come to redemption on some distant world beyond the Fringe. Instead, by fate or the Force, the vessel brought these 12 exiles to a desolate planet called Korriban. There, they discovered natives called Sith, a species of red-skinned humanoids strong in the Force and naturally inclined toward the dark side. The Sith were initially fearful of these outsiders, who they called the Jedi, but the exiles were nonetheless able to infiltrate their society. The Sith took them to Ziost, their frigid adopted homeworld, where the exiles won the trust of the Sith King Hakagram Graush. Then, Ajunta Pal betrayed and murdered Graush, claiming the throne of Ziost and rule over the Sith people. He and his followers seized control of Sith society, establishing an empire. In triumph, they claimed new titles for themselves, becoming the Dark Lords of the Sith. The Sith Lords would spend the next 2,000 years growing their empire, eagerly awaiting the day when they would strike back against the Jedi and the Republic. When we last left off, the 100-Year Darkness had just ended in 6,900 BBY, and 12 exiled Dark Jedi had landed on Korriban and become the first Lords of the Sith. They claimed Ziost, the icy adopted homeworld of the Sith species, as their capital, and founded the first Sith Empire. Beyond the fringe of known space, they and their successors amassed armies and plotted revenge on the Republic. But the Republic wasn't really concerned with the Sith. Indeed, it didn't even know they existed. It was more worried about the Mandalorians. We're betting that you were wondering when the Mandos would finally appear in our stories of the Republic's olden days. Truth be told, the predecessors of the Mandalorians, a species of grey reptilians called the Tongs, had actually been roaming the galaxy since before the Republic was even formed. But they didn't become relevant to the galaxy until, in 7000 BBY, a Tong named Mandalore led his people to a new planet out beyond the northern fringe of the Republic, a jungle world that they claimed and named Mandalore after their leader. The Tong followers of Mandalore the First, as he came to be known, were the first Mandalorians. In those early days, they defeated the fearsome Mandalorian giants, the Jaeklians, the remote human colonies on Gargon and Concord Dawn, the Fenelar and the Tlon. As they went, they began to adapt alien technologies and strategies into their war-making, appropriating Fenelar ships, Jaeklian blades, and even recovered Republic rocket packs. The Mandalorians also fought a few small wars on frontier colonies, including the Pathfinder Fury of 5451 BBY and the Nakat incursions of the 5130s BBY. This all but completely stymied the Republic's northward expansion, though as of 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Mandalorians' crusades had yet to result in anything serious. Additionally, while northward expansion was stalled by Mandalorian raiders, southward expansion opened up for the Republic. In around 5500 BBY, two new hyperspace mega routes were blazed, the Rimmer Trade Route and the Corellian Trade Spine. Between them, new avenues for colonization sprung up, and the Republic once more began to prosper. In 5000 BBY, the Republic's newfound age of prosperity was crowned off by something entirely unexpected: the unification of the Koros system. The 7 worlds of the Koros system in the deep core were among humanity's first colonies, yet they had remained separate for 17,000 years. It was only with the ascension of Empress Teta in 5010 BBY that started to change. Teta launched what she called the Reunification Wars, an attempt to bring the whole Koros system under her rule. The war lasted for 10 years, but with the help of Jedi Odan Teta emerged victorious, ushering in newfound prosperity for the system. Not everyone in the Koros system felt the benefits of this prosperity, however. The young hyperspace scouts, Gav and Jory Daragon, for example, were almost out of both money and luck. They had lost their parents in the Battle of Kirek, the last clash of Teta's wars. They were in debt for repairs on their ship, the Starbreaker 12, and to make matters worse, their most recently discovered route, which passed over the red giant Primus Golud, was unstable. A local crime lord had lost a fortune to the red giant and wanted the Daragon twins dead over it. With their lives at risk, owning nothing but their ship and the clothes on their backs, Gav and Jory took to the stars once more. Charting their course at random, they ventured far out into the unknown. With their random jump, they found the most improbable route in the history of the galaxy, the Daragon Trail, a straight shot from Koros to Korriban. In doing so, they also found the Sith Empire. The Sith were in a rather tumultuous state at the time. For over a century, the Empire had been ruled by the Dark Lord Marka Ragnos, who ushered in the golden age of the Sith. But shortly before the Daragons' foray into the unknown, Ragnos had died and he had left no clear successor. Moreover, in his last decades, the Sith Empire had become stagnant. Some of the Sith Lords, led by Ludo Kresh, were perfectly fine with this. Others, like Naga Sadow, dreamed of conquest. However, the dreams of this latter group were repeatedly frustrated by the Stygian Caldera, a shroud of nebulae and interstellar gases that cut Sith space off from the rest of the galaxy. They had no way to get beyond it, to find new targets to conquer, until the Daragons arrived. The Daragons' arrival came right in the middle of a battle between Ludo Kresh and Naga Sadow, Ragnos' prospective successors. They called off their duel as soon as the two scouts stepped out of their ship, ordering their Massassi warriors to seize them. The Daragons were taken to Ziost, where a fiery debate began between the Sith Lords. Ludo Kresh believed that the new arrivals should be immediately executed, fearing they were the precursor to a Republic strike force. But Naga Sadow instead argued that they should be released and allowed to lead the Sith back to the Republic. Where Kresh saw the Republic as a potential threat, Sadow saw it as a target ripe for conquest. Sadow eventually won the other Sith Lords over, becoming Dark Lord of the Sith over Kresh's objections. He consolidated his power by seemingly wiping out Kresh and his forces in a battle over Kar Delba, during which he allowed Giorgi Daragon to escape in the Starbreaker 12. But this was a trick. He had planted a tracking device on the ship, hoping Giorgi would lead him to the Republic. Naturally, she did exactly that, fleeing back to Koros Major to warn Empress Teta of the coming invasion. Teta and Odan her Jedi advisor, heeded these warnings, but the Senate on Coruscant didn't, and so the Republic was unprepared when the invasion came. Just as Giorgi had predicted, a vast armada of Sith warships tore down the Daragon Trail and launched a colossal assault against the worlds of the Koros system, the start of the Great Hyperspace War. And that wasn't all. This invasion fleet was being led by none other than Gav Daragon. As he had mustered his forces back on Kar Shien, Naga Sadow had continued to introduce Gav to the ways of the Sith, manipulating him and blaming his family's woes on the failures of the Republic. Detecting that the young man was Force-sensitive, Sadow planned to make him an apprentice and tasked him with leading the invasion of his own homeworld. At first, the Sith assault on the Koros system was a massive success. Gav's ships easily dispatched Empress Teta's battle-weary fleet, and hordes of Massassi warriors were making good progress on all 7 worlds. Content that Koros was secure, Naga Sadow then ordered his fleets to begin assaults on the rest of the Republic as well. Sith warships stormed down the Koros trunk line, attacking Caecilius and the shipyards of Forost before arriving in the skies above Coruscant itself. From there, Sith fleets also attacked Metalos, Ixtlar, Basilic, and Shorkin, but the Sith's biggest assault force was reserved for the galactic capital itself. Led by Sith Lord Shah Dukkan, a massive fleet crowded the skies of Coruscant, raining drop pods full of Massassi and war beasts onto Galactic City. Coruscant's unprepared defenders were swept away, unable to contend with the sheer size of the Sith army, and soon the Jedi were fending off Massassi on the steps of the Senate building itself. But just as quickly as it had started, the Sith invasion began to fall apart. On Koros Major, Gav Daragon was confronted by Giorgi, who showed him the damage he had done to their home. Remorseful and full of doubt, Gav fled back to his master, who was camped out in a meditation sphere above Primus Golud. Gav fired on the meditation sphere, breaking Sadow's focus. In the process, he revealed a crucial weakness of the Sith Armada. Most of it didn't exist. Sadow had been creating massive illusions on the systems the Sith had been attacking from his meditation sphere, making his armies appear far larger than they were. With his concentration broken, Sadow's illusions vanished, and the tide of war began to turn. The Republic Navy counterattacked from Anaxis, driving the Sith from Coruscant, the Koros system, and the other core worlds. The Sith fleet regrouped at Primus Golud, but the Republic followed them there, led by Empress Teta, Odan and Giorgi Daragon. The Sith weren't keen to admit defeat, however. Sadow lured Gav Daragon to his meditation ship and then trapped him there, returning to his flagship, the Corsair. Aboard the Corsair, Sadow activated a super weapon that caused Primus Golud to become extremely unstable, hoping to cover the retreat of his forces with a supernova. But Gav warned the Republic about what Sadow was planning, and also informed them that the Sith Empire was unprotected without Sadow's armies. Armed with this knowledge, Teta and her fleet followed the Sith back to their empire, even as Gav Daragon perished in the explosion of Primus Golud. Sadow and the remnants of his forces limped back to Korriban, where they found Ludo Kresh and a hostile fleet waiting for them. Sadow's rival had survived the trap that had been set for him and had usurped control of the Sith Empire and its remaining fleets. A battle erupted between the two Dark Lords, destroying the rest of the Sith Empire's strength. Sadow was ultimately the victor, killing Kresh for real this time, but the battle was scarcely over when Empress Teta and the Republic Navy arrived and opened fire on the remaining Sith ships. Sadao was forced to flee as the rest of his fleet was annihilated by Teta's forces, ending the Great Hyperspace War in a decisive Republic victory. Following the war, Supreme Chancellor Poltimo sent the Republic Navy back into Sith space, accompanied by the Jedi, both ordered to finish off the Sith Empire. Under the guidance of the Jedi, the Republic tried to destroy only the Sith leadership, but they soon found out that the entire populations of captured worlds killed themselves once their leaders were eliminated. Between the assaults and Sith suicides, Sith space was entirely devoid of life in just a year's time. That wasn't the last the galaxy saw of the Sith, however. Survivors regrouped on the remote worlds Thul, Vjun, and Tund. A sizable part of the Empire's population regrouped under the Sith Lord Darth Vitiate and fled to the Galactic Rim. Naga Sadow, meanwhile, led his ship of Massassi warriors to Yavin 4, a remote jungle moon. There, they began the work of building a new empire in exile, constructing massive temples to hide their terrible weapons. The Republic wouldn't learn of their little redoubt for another 1,000 years. At the end of 5000 BBY, the Republic was well on its way to recovery from the shock of the Great Hyperspace War. The Republic itself had lost little due to the limited nature of the Sith assault, while the Sith themselves had been completely vanquished, or so the Jedi thought. What had been a thriving empire just months before was nothing but dust and echoes, as its people were all either dead or hiding in the far corners of wild space. With the Sith Empire gone, the Republic once more began to thrive and expand. The millennium following the Great Hyperspace War was called the Post-Mandarin period, and during it, the Republic once more began to expand, pushing the borders of wild space and reclaiming many sectors from the Hutts. As the Republic expanded, new conflicts sprang up all over the galaxy, but wherever the fires of war burned, the Jedi and the Republic army were quick to put an end to the fighting. Using the first modern lightsabers, Jedi and their Republic rocket jumper allies put an end to the Gank massacres of 4800 BBY, the Kay Keeley Reconquista of 4225 BBY, the Battle of Lorel in 4030 BBY, and the Kusea border conflict 4007 years before the Battle of Yavin. There were two more serious conflicts in this period as well. 4250 BBY saw the Jedi Order have a third Great Schism, which ended when the surviving Dark Jedi rebels destroyed the entire Voltar system, killing themselves in the process. In 4015 BBY, the galaxy also experienced the Great Droid Revolution, which the Jedi quickly stopped. In the last years of the post-Mandarin period, the Republic also started to have serious trouble with the Mandalorian Crusaders, then led by Mandalore the Indomitable. Under his leadership, many Crusaders left Mandalore and returned to their nomadic roots, ravaging worlds as they moved from place to place. Their raids began to escalate, and the Crusaders even began attacking Republic worlds. In 4024 BBY, the Crusaders wiped out the Navuta species in the Navuta extinction, and in 4017 BBY, they did the same thing to the Basiliskans. These raids were nothing, however, compared to the hell the Republic was about to endure. It began on Onderon, an unremarkable world in the slice with only one settlement, the city of Iziz, an island of civilization in a jungle full of vicious beasts. In 2400 BBY, Onderon was conquered by Freedon Nad, a dark Jedi who'd been kicked out of the Order. Unbeknownst to most of the galaxy, however, Nad wasn't just a dark Jedi, he was also a Sith Lord. After his expulsion from the Jedi Order, Nad had travelled to Yavin 4, where he encountered the remnants of the Sith. He became the apprentice of the Dark Lord Naga Sadow, who had hidden on the moon with his Massassi warriors for 600 years. Nad learned many of Sadow's secrets before killing him and leaving for Onderon. In his time as King of Iziz, Frida Nad turned Iziz into a secret bastion of the dark side, spreading Sith teachings even among non-Force sensitives. Those who opposed his rule were banished to the jungles, which was meant as a death sentence. But some of those who were banished survived, and in time they became the Beast Riders, a second Onderonian civilization. The Beast Riders waged war against Nad and his followers, even after Nad's death. The Beast Wars of Onderon raged for about 400 years, until in 4000 BBY, Queen Aminoa of Iziz called Jedi for help in resolving the conflict. By that point, it was believed that the legacy of Frida Nad was dead and gone, and the Jedi arrived on Onderon believing that the Beast Riders were the ones that needed to be stopped, but they quickly discovered the truth. Aminoa was an adherent to Sith teachings, and the Beast Riders were the ones who were in the right. These Jedi, a group led by Padawan Ulic Qel-Droma, his brother Kay Qel-Droma, and fellow Padawan Nomi Sunrider, brought Aminoa to justice, deposing her and negotiating peace between Iziz and the Riders. But that was only the beginning. 2 years after the end of the Beast Wars, Sith sympathizers began an uprising in Iziz. From beyond the grave, the spectre of Frida Nad had been manipulating his successors the whole time, and as a result, the Sith teachings were far stronger on Onderon than the Jedi had suspected. The same Jedi who had ended the Beast Wars, with the help of Master Arca Jeth, put down the uprising, but in the chaos, they had failed to stop Nad's teachings from escaping Onderon. 2 visiting nobles from the Empress Teta system, Satal and Alima Keto, made contact with Nad's spectre, as did Exar Kun, an arrogant Jedi who was well on his way to the dark side. Nad taught the Keto cousins Sith sorcery and helped them claim a trove of dark side artifacts, and then he guided Kun to Korriban. In Korriban's Valley of the Dark Lords, Nad goaded Kun into embracing the dark side, and from there, he led the fallen Jedi to Yavin 4, where he guided him to the remnants of Naga Sadow's empire in exile. Kun quickly mastered Sith techniques that Sadow had left records of, allowing him to subjugate the Massassi. Determining that he no longer needed Frida Nad, Kun destroyed his would-be master's spectre and claimed the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. Meanwhile, Satal and Alima Keto returned home and formed an organization called the Krath, a dark side cult that quickly spread through the Teta system. The Krath launched a violent coup and seized control of the system and defeated a Republic fleet sent in to stop them. Fearing that the rise of the Krath was the start of a new Sith threat, the Jedi Order called a conclave to discuss the matter on Dagobah. The conclave was interrupted, however, by Krath war droids, who killed many Jedi, including Ulic Qel-Droma's master, before being destroyed. Filled with grief, Qel-Droma vowed to stop the Krath menace and volunteered to infiltrate the Krath to bring them down. He traveled to the Emperor's Teta system and met with Satal and Alima, but instead of stopping them, he ultimately fell to the dark side himself, killing Satal but allying himself with Alima. Sensing the young Jedi's fall, Exar Kun traveled to Koros Major to kill Ulic, fearing that Qel-Droma would soon become a rival. But as Kun and Qel-Droma fought, they were interrupted by a vision of ancient Sith Lord Marka Ragnos, who commanded them to stop fighting. Ragnos proclaimed them both to be the new Lords of the Sith, with Kun being the master and Qel-Droma being the apprentice. When the vision faded, Kun and Qel-Droma agreed to an alliance, and vowed to destroy the Republic between them. So began the Great Sith War. Kun and Qel-Droma wasted no time in beginning their offensive. Using the Dark Reaper, a Sith artifact Kun had recovered on Yavin, Qel-Droma began to expand Krath's space, conquering several worlds near the Empress Teta and winning the allegiance of the Tapani sector, which included the shipyards of Fondor. Qel-Droma also encountered the Mandalorian Crusaders, and after beating Mandalore the Indomitable in a duel, he won their allegiance as well. Meanwhile, Exar Kun traveled to Ossus, the Jedi homeworld, where he covertly began turning young Jedi to the dark side. To cover for Kun's activities, Qel-Droma launched the Dark Reaper campaign, cutting a bloody swath across the Tyon cluster. The ancient Sith superweapon annihilated whole Republic armies on Macam Tay and Raxus Prime, but Ulic had mixed feelings about using it and covertly tipped the Jedi off on how to destroy it. In a battle at Thule, they did exactly that, and at the same time, Keldroma took advantage of their distraction to conquer the shipyards of Forerost. From Forerost, Keldroma and the Krath attacked Coruscant itself. They carved a swath through Galactic City, but at the last minute, Keldroma was betrayed by Elima Keto, who recalled the Krath forces and allowed him to be captured. Outraged over the attack, the Galactic Senate held a publicized trial for Keldroma, which they hoped would help reassure the Republic that they had things under control. However, in the middle of the trial, Exar Kun barged in, paralyzed the whole Senate with the Force, freed Keldroma, murdered both the Supreme Chancellor and his former master, and left just as suddenly as he arrived. Understandably, this took the Republic from a state of concern to one of sheer panic. They had good reason to be terrified. Upon being freed, Keldroma began the Krath Holy Crusade, in which Sith fleets cut a bloody swath across the Republic from the core to the outer rim. Meanwhile, the Mandalorians launched their own crusades, cutting across wild space to attack Iridonia and moving up the Polemian toward Ossus. The Jedi stopped their advance, but around the same time, they themselves were under threat. On Exar Kun's orders, hundreds of fallen Jedi rose up and butchered their masters, joining Exar's Brotherhood of the Sith and attacking Republic forces. Emboldened by these early victories, Kun and Keldroma landed on Ossus, the homeworld of the Jedi, under the cover of the Jedi infighting, intending to loot several sacred Jedi sites. There, Keldroma came face to face with his brother, Kay, who he fought and killed in a duel. Horrified by what he'd done, Keldroma abandoned the Sith and surrendered to Nomi Sunrider, who stripped him of his Force powers and took him prisoner. At around the same time, Krath fleets led by Elima Keto were moving toward Ossus along the Polemian, led by Naga Sadow's ancient flagship, the Corsair. During a battle in the Kron Cluster, a collection of a dozen stars near Ossus, Elima used the superweapon aboard the Corsair to rip out the core of a nearby star, as Exar Kun had suggested she do. But this was a trick, a repayment for her earlier betrayal of Ulic. That maneuver caused all the stars in the cluster to supernova at once, annihilating all ships present. The resultant cataclysm devastated Ossus, cleansing the planet of life. Most of the Jedi were able to escape before the cataclysm struck, however, and they moved their base of operations to a new temple on Coruscant. The destruction of Ossus was the greatest victory of the Brotherhood of the Sith, but fortunately, it would also be their last. Following the death of Elima Keto and Keldroma's surrender, the Krath were left leaderless, and the Republic launched a massive counter-offensive against their fleets, annihilating them at Kemplex 9, Boontar, Fondor, Jindin, and Gamor. Around the same time, the Mandalorian Crusaders were defeated in a battle above Onderon, and Mandalore the Indomitable was overwhelmed and killed by beasts on Duxon, Onderon's moon. Exar Kun suddenly found himself the last leader of the Brotherhood, and as his fallen followers were defeated by the Jedi all over the galaxy, he retreated to Yavin 4. Republic fleets followed him there, however, and they bombed the moon to hell, setting fire to its jungles. The Massassi were wiped out and Exar Kun vanished, presumably dead. The Great Sith War was over just as suddenly as it had begun. The war only lasted for a single year, 3,996 BBY to be exact. Its impact, however, was immense. It was just the first of the Old Sith Wars. The 30 years after the Great Sith War were called the Restoration Period, the calm before the storm. During those decades, the Republic rebuilt, overhauling its aging military and adopting new blaster technology, an innovation derived from Mandalorian weapon designs. The last remnants of the Krath and Exar Kun's Sith followers were dispersed, while Ulic Qel-Droma went into self-imposed exile on Renvar. The Jedi Order rebuilt as well, Having lost their homeworld of Ossus near the end of the war, they set up shop in a new Jedi temple on Coruscant and try to rebuild after suffering grievous losses to the Sith. In the early years of the Restoration period, the Jedi Council also authorized the Great Hunt, in which a team of Jedi were sent out to hunt what they thought were the last Sith-spawn monsters. The peace of the Restoration period didn't last. In 3970 BBY, the Argazda sector, a small group of systems on the Republic's frontier, seceded and became the Argazdan Redoubt. The Redoubt's ruling Argazdans, free of Republic scrutiny, began a 300-year-long reign of terror called the Cairns Disorders, starting with the first of what would be many genocides on Eresus. But at the time, the Republic wasn't able to do much about the Argazdans. They had bigger problems. The Republic wasn't the only faction that was rebuilding during the Restoration period. In a battle over Onderon at the end of the war, the Mandalorian Crusaders, who had been allies of the Sith, were defeated, and their leader was killed by beasts on Duxon, Onderon's moon. But on the same day Mandalore the Indomitable fell, another rose to take his place. A warrior stumbled upon Mandalore's body in the jungles and, claiming his mask for his own, became the new Mandalore, as had been tradition for millennia. He declared himself Mandalore the Ultimate. Returning home, the new Mandalore rallied his people in secret on Mandalore and Duxon, where he declared a series of reforms that would change the Mandalorians forever. Where the Mandalorians had previously consisted of mostly Tongs, they would henceforth accept recruits from all species. Additionally, they were to abandon their nomadic ways and keep the worlds they conquered so as to build up a military force to rival the Republic's. In the decades after the end of the Great Sith War, these Neo-Crusaders conquered a vast swath of the wild space beyond the Republic's northern fringe. In 3976 BBY, Mandalore the Ultimate began what would later be called the Mandalorian Wars. At first, he and his Neo-Crusaders stayed beyond the borders of the Republic, conquering fringe worlds like Cathar and Altair. But before long, they began to bite into Republic territory, clearly preparing for a larger invasion. Despite the obvious nature of the growing threat, the Republic, still war-weary, neglected to do anything about it. That mistake nearly proved fatal. In 3965 BBY, 11 years after the Mandalorians began their campaigns, the Neo-Crusaders finally began attacking Republic warships near Taris. The war had come to the Republic at last, but for nearly a year, it seemed to be limited in scope. The Mandalorians only deployed limited forces in the first year of this new stage of the war, and they only attacked minor resource worlds. Expecting that a greater Mandalorian invasion would soon be coming, the Republic Navy established the Jebel Vanquo Tarnith Line, a security cordon just beyond Taris, which they reinforced to the best of their abilities. But it wasn't enough. 3,964 years before the Battle of Yavin, this false war came to an abrupt end when the Mandalorians unleashed a massive armada against the line, annihilating the Republic's fleets and seizing Taris and Vanquo in lightning strikes. With his enemies in disarray, Mandalore the Ultimate then ordered a full invasion of the Republic. The Mandalorians struck in 3 sectors at once, pushing Corwood from Taris while also hitting the Tyon cluster and the northern dependencies. Republic forces successfully defended Ithor and Iridonia from the Mandalorians, but elsewhere, they didn't stand a chance. With every world the Mandalorians conquered, their numbers swelled with millions of new recruits. Entire sectors surrendered themselves as they advanced, terrified by the whispers of Cathar, where the Mandalorians had killed nearly the entire population, and Sirocco, which the Mandalorians had pummeled with nuclear bombs. The Mandalorians cut deeper into the heart of the Republic, culminating in the Mandalorian triumph in 3962 BBY. In that year, The Mandalorians pushed into the Inner Rim and then the colonies. Then, with a massive assault on Duro, they breached the boundaries of the core worlds themselves. In its hour of need, the Republic turned to the Jedi for aid, but the Jedi Council refused to intervene. They sensed that a bigger threat was on the horizon and wanted to wait for it to reveal itself before rushing off to war. Fortunately for the Republic, a whole lot of Jedi thought that was bullshit. Under the Jedi Knights Revan and Malak, these Jedi Crusaders joined the Republic military anyway, becoming the galaxy's first Jedi generals. Beginning in 3961 BBY, these Jedi, called the Revanchists, began a massive counter-offensive, pushing the Mandalorians out of the core and back toward wild space. Led by the tactical genius Revan and the unparalleled warrior Malak, the Republic military finally started winning battles again. The cost of victory was high, however. The Jedi found themselves having to take moral shortcuts to come out on top, matching the Mandalorians for brutality and sacrificing thousands of soldiers in battle after battle. In this manner, Revan and Malak slowly but surely crushed the Mandalorians. 3,960 years before the Battle of Yavin, they reclaimed Taris and Duxon at a massive cost in lives, and then utterly defeated the Mandalorians in the terrible Battle of Malachor V. Against all odds, the Mandalorian Wars ended with the Republic victory. At Malachor V, Mandalore the Ultimate was killed and Revan hid his mask on a remote ice world, leaving the Mandalorians leaderless. They turned on each other and their empire collapsed, giving the Republic a bit of room to breathe. But this peace wouldn't last. After the Battle of Malachor V, Revan and Malak had disappeared, claiming they had other battles to fight in the unknown space beyond Malachor. For a year, they were presumed dead. Then, in 3959 BBY, they returned at the head of a massive fleet, launching surprise attacks on the shipyards of Forost and Fondor. They declared themselves Darth Revan and Darth Malak, the Dark Lords of a new Sith Empire. The galaxy was stunned by this sudden betrayal. Some in the Republic were shocked that Revan and Malak had become brutal conquerors and resolved to fight back against the new Sith threat. But others decided that their loyalties lay with the heroes of the Mandalorian Wars, not the failing Republic. A huge portion of the Republic military defected to join the Sith, as did many Jedi. So many Jedi joined the Sith that this second Sith War was more commonly known by another name, the Jedi Civil War. In just 3 short years, Revan's Sith Empire seized control of a full third of Republic space. The Republic didn't stand a chance. They were still weak from the Mandalorian Wars. They were badly outnumbered and, above all, they just couldn't compete with Revan's military genius. Once more, it fell to the Jedi to save the day, and this time, the Order went to war. Even as their numbers were diminished by casualties and defections, they took command of the Republic military and resolved to stop Revan. They rallied behind Bastila Shan, a young Jedi with the rare gift of battle meditation. Thanks to Bastila and her battle meditation, the Republic was able to stave off the Sith advance, at least for a time. In a major stroke of luck, they even managed to capture Darth Revan himself, leaving Malak to take control of the Empire. They hoped that this would put a stop to the Sith advance, but when Malak kept up the Sith offensive like nothing had happened, the Jedi turned to the captured Revan to save them. His mind had been badly damaged in the battle in which he'd been captured, but the Jedi were able to heal it and replace his old personality with a new one, that of a soldier in service to the Republic. The amnesiac Revan eventually rediscovered his force sensitivity on Taris, trained to become a Jedi once more, and set out in pursuit of the ancient star maps. These maps led Revan and his followers to Rakata Prime, the heart of the ancient Infinite Empire. There, they found the Starforge, a massive space station capable of churning out infinite fleets, the source of the Sith's vast armada. In 3956 BBY's Battle of Rakata Prime, Revan killed Malak and rescued Bastila, while the Republic Navy destroyed the Starforge, putting an end to the Jedi Civil War. Once again, the Republic had come frighteningly close to certain doom, and once again, it was just barely saved from destruction. After the death of Darth Malak, the Sith had their own civil war, a brief but destructive conflict that all but wiped them out. Even as the redeemed Revan vanished into wild space, seeking answers to resurfaced memories, the Sith Empire he had built destroyed itself. But even though the Republic had won the Jedi Civil War in the end, the victory was Pyrrhic. There were only a few hundred Jedi left at the war's end, and the Republic was still on the verge of collapse. This time, the Republic seemed doomed not because of the Sith or the Mandalorians, but because of itself. It was terribly weak, and it was uncertain whether it was even capable of rebuilding itself. To make matters worse, the Sith weren't quite finished. After the Sith Civil War, the tattered remnants of Revan's empire regrouped at Malachor V under a triumvirate of Sith Lords, Darth Traya, Darth Nihilus, and Darth Sion. Over the next few years, they began the Dark Wars, a campaign of sabotage and assassination. In secret, Sith assassins carried out the first Jedi Purge, while other Sith agents made the Republic's smaller problems grow worse. By 3951 BBY, it seemed that the Sith verged on victory. The Jedi Order vanished into the shadows after Darth Nihilus attacked during their last gathering at Qatar. Republic restoration projects seemed poised to fail, while worlds like Onderon were openly considering secession from the Republic. But yet again, the Jedi delivered victory in the Dark Wars at the last minute. Mitra Surik, an exile and the so-called Last Jedi, put a stop to a series of Sith plots and began to rebuild the Jedi Order. Above Telos IV, she and the Republic Navy destroyed Darth Nihilus and his fleet, following which she killed Darth Sion and Darth Traya on Malachor V, which was destroyed entirely. The Republic wasn't quite doomed yet. Following the end of the Dark Wars, both the Republic and the Jedi Order rebuilt, slowly but surely, untroubled by Sith threats for a time. Mitra Surik, meanwhile, left known space in pursuit of Revan. On Malachor V, she had learned that another threat to the Republic had been lurking out in the unknown the whole time. A threat that predated Revan, the Mandalorians, or even Exar Kun. In a few hundred years, that threat would reveal itself. "3,950 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Republic was still reeling from the aftermath of the old Sith Wars, but it was finally beginning to recover. It still had many challenges to face, with the ongoing Khan's disorders and rogue infrastructure droids being the biggest problems of the day. However, it seemed like the Sith were gone and the galaxy seemed to be piecing itself back together in their absence. It took a century or two for the Republic to recover fully. Before long, however, it was back on its feet, ready to get back to expansion. Between 3705 BBY and 3693 BBY, one of the most important astrographical developments in galactic history occurred. By the time of the old Sith Wars, the galaxy had long been dominated by four major hyperspace routes: the Polemian route, the Corellian Run, the Corellian Trade Spine, and the Rimmer Trade route. Now, a fifth mega route joined the list, the Hydian Way, the first and only hyperspace route to stretch all the way across the galaxy. Brental-born hyperspace scout Freya Kalia, together with Duros Banu Hydian, had knit together a hyperspace route from Farana on the galaxy's northeastern fringe to Lamina Soph on the southeastern fringe. This massive route quickly became one of the most important in the Republic. Shortly after the blazing of the Hydian, the Khan's disorders finally came to an end. By that point, the despots of the Agazdan Redoubt, a separatist state on the Republic's northern fringe, had terrorized their neighbors for nearly 300 years, murdering almost 5 billion innocents overall. Previously, the Republic had been too weak and too busy with the Sith to do anything about it, but by 3700 BBY, the Senate was finally ready to act. A Jedi-led Republic military task force invaded and completely dismantled the Argazdan redoubt, liberating Lord and the other planets the Argazdans had oppressed. To the optimists in the galaxy, it seemed that the Republic would have peace once more. Of course, the optimists couldn't have been more wrong. For over 1,000 years, a dark secret had been lurking beyond the borders of the Republic, the Empire of the true Sith. After the fall of the original Sith Empire, refugees from Sith space banded together under Darth Vitiate and the true Sith cult and fled the Republic's genocidal assault on their homeworlds. They wandered wild space for 20 years before Vitiate led them to a new homeworld, Dromund Kaas, a planet that, as it turned out, was actually part of the original Sith Empire. Nonetheless, it was a world that neither the Jedi nor the Republic knew about, and there, Vitiate and his followers would remain hidden for a millennium. The true Sith stayed in the shadows during the post-Mandarin period, quietly conquering worlds that the Republic didn't even know about, amassing great fleets and biding their time. They built a new Sith Empire with Vitiate as its emperor and waited eagerly for their revenge against the Republic. After the Great Sith War, the Emperor began probing the Republic. He influenced the beginning of the Mandalorian Wars and was also responsible for Revan's fall and the Jedi Civil War that followed. After the end of the old Sith Wars, the Sith Empire continued to bide its time for a few more centuries, building up an armada and inserting agents into the governments of Republic worlds. Then, without warning, they struck. In 3681 BBY, Sith warships dropped out of hyperspace above Korriban, capturing the planet from a small Republic military convoy and kickstarting the Great Galactic War. From there, Sith fleets began launching attacks all over the Republic's holdings along the Hydian Way, capturing planet after planet in their ferocious campaign. The Republic military, led once more by Jedi generals, fought back, but the Sith had a stronger fleet and more momentum. They won battle after battle, with the most notable Sith victories being at Sluis Van, Balmorra, Manaan, Hoth, and Ord Radamar. The Republic fought well, earning its own victories at Bothawi and Alderaan, but it was simply unprepared for the Sith onslaught. The Great Galactic War lasted for 28 years, all told, and the Republic military just wasn't able to last for that long against the endless forces the Empire seemingly had to throw at it. Slowly, the Sith began to claim more and more territory, and the Republic's victories became rarer. Things got worse when the Mandalorians allied with the Sith and blockaded the Hydian Way, causing mass goods shortages in the Republic. Finally, in 3653 BBY, the Sith concluded the war with the sacking of Coruscant. In that climatic battle, a Sith force under Darth Malgus stormed and destroyed the Jedi Temple, while the Sith Armada scattered Coruscant's defenders and ransacked the planet. Following this decisive Sith victory, the Republic surrendered. The Senate ratified the Treaty of Coruscant, which yielded half of the known galaxy to the Sith Empire, bringing an end to the Great Galactic War. The Great Galactic War was followed by an uneasy, decade-long Cold War. Under the Treaty of Coruscant, the galaxy was divided almost evenly between the Republic and the Sith, an entirely unprecedented occurrence. Republic loyalists and Imperials alike were confused by the sudden peace. It seemed totally against the nature of the Sith to agree to an armistice. This was something that bothered many Siths as well, but it was a development indicative of the direction in which the Sith Empire was heading, away from the legacy of the original Sith. We'll get to that later. The Cold War involved a number of proxy wars and minor skirmishes, and though diplomats tried to keep the peace between the Republic and the Empire during this time, it was only a matter of time before war started up again. In 3643 BBY, 9 years after the Treaty of Coruscant, a new galactic war began, as the Republic attempted to reclaim lost territory and the Sith tried to resume their offensive. Early in the war, the Republic successfully liberated Balmorra, while the Sith successfully captured Taris, but for the first 3 years of the conflict, the war was mostly a stalemate. The tides began to turn in 3640 BBY, however. Around that time, Darth Vitiate had begun to prepare a great ritual, one he believed would turn him into a god. As this ritual threatened to cleanse the entire galaxy of life, the Jedi hastily assembled a strike team to stop him. Led by the hero of Tython, these Jedi confronted the Emperor on Dromund Kaas and destroyed him, or so it was believed. This was a massive blow to the Sith and resulted in the Empire fracturing into various factions, which battled each other as well as the Republic. Even the Hutts briefly remilitarized and got involved at one point, though they were quickly beaten back into Hutt space. However, in 3636 BBY, the Second Galactic War came to an abrupt end when a third major power suddenly entered the war, the Eternal Empire. As it turned out, Darth Vitiate had another avatar hiding out on Zakul in the unknown regions, Valkorion, the ruler of the Eternal Empire. With a gargantuan automated armada and legions of Force sensitives, the Eternal Empire surpassed the strength of both the Sith Empire and the Republic. When it entered the Galactic War, it quickly overcame both powers and became the victor of the conflict. Both the Republic and the Sith became Valkorion's vassals, and for a short while, the Eternal Empire effectively ruled the galaxy. Valkorion's victory didn't last, however. With the help of the Outlander, his son Arkan overthrew him and took over the Eternal Empire. 6 years later, the Outlander led a joint alliance of Republic and Sith forces, called the Eternal Alliance, in a revolt against the Empire, killing Arkan and seizing control of Zakul's fleet. For a brief time, there was peace in the galaxy once again, but it ultimately only took a few years for the Eternal Alliance to fall apart and for the Republic and Sith to get back to fighting each other. All that remained of the Eternal Empire, though, rapidly faded into memory. By 3628 BBY, the Third Galactic War was on, and this time, the Republic and the Sith were much more evenly matched. The spirit of Darth Vitiate was finally destroyed during this period, and the Sith came under a succession of emperors and warlords. As fighting dragged on, however, the Sith Empire began to noticeably change. It had been moving away from Sith traditions for centuries, as Darth Vitiate began to care about himself and only himself. Sith ideology be damned. Even before the Great Galactic War, the Empire had started to bureaucratize. By the time of the Third Galactic War, the Sith Empire was really just a dark mirror of the Republic, with even the Sith themselves becoming more like an evil Jedi Order than true Sith. There were even light-sided and respectable Sith during this period who fought for the Empire not out of support of the dark side, but a sense of patriotism. The Empire was slowly ceasing to be truly Sith. Perhaps because of this change, the Sith Empire slowly fizzled out. We don't quite know when it finally collapsed, though we do know that the Galactic Wars ultimately ended with another total Republic victory. There were a few more minor Sith wars after the Third Galactic War, most notably the Darth Decius conflict, but they became increasingly smaller in scale until they eventually stopped entirely. By 3000 BBY, the Sith were, for all intents and purposes, extinct. They survived only in small cults scattered across the Outer Rim, impotent and hiding from the Jedi. The Galactic Wars included some of the greatest victories of the Sith, and for millennia, the true Sith came closer than any other Sith faction to ruling the galaxy. They were the last major wars the old Sith would ever fight, however. Under Darth Vitiate, the Sith came closer to victory than ever before, but because of Vitiate's mad quest for godhood, they never attained that victory. Once again, the Sith were their own worst enemies here. As a final note, we just wanted to remind you all that since Star Wars The Old Republic is still releasing story content, this video might end up being out of date sometime in the near future. We don't know how the Third Galactic War ended because the game's writers simply haven't gotten that far, and we don't really know how the story will develop in the future. We've told you the important parts of the story thus far though, so that should cut it for now. But that's the story of the last set of wars with the old Sith. Following the fall of the Empire, the Sith were largely believed to be extinct, but as we all know, they wouldn't stay that way. The next set of Sith Wars were only a millennium and a half away, and they would be the most devastating yet. Our story last left off with the old Sith dead and gone, and the Republic beginning to rebuild. The true Sith Empire, its successor states, and the armies of Darth Decimus had all been defeated, and as far as the Jedi knew, the Sith were extinct at last. By 3500 BBY, the Republic entered the Inter-Sith Wars period, a time of renewal for galactic civilization. For 500 years, after the end of the war with Darth Decimus, the last of the old Sith Wars, the Republic had peace. That peace was briefly broken in 3017 BBY with a sequel that nobody asked for. Remember the Alsacan conflicts? We discussed them in our 4th entry in this series if you need a quick recap. The first conflict began in 17,000 BBY with many more following over the years. The last we discussed was the 10th Alsacan conflict, which happened in about 10,000 BBY. 3017 years before the Battle of Yavin, after a further 6, the 17th Alsacan conflict began nearly 14,000 years after the first. Once again, the Republic was split between worlds loyal to Coruscant, Alsacan, and Corellia. This time, however, the Corellians got sick of everyone else's Sith and finally got involved in the fighting. Corellian frigates lashed out against both sides, crippling both the Republic's battleships and the Alsacani missile cruisers. Corellia ultimately proved victorious, and Prince Admiral Jonash Isolo negotiated a peace treaty between Coruscant and Alsacan at sword points on the Senate floor. The Alsacan conflicts, at long last, were over. After the end of the 17th Alsacan conflict, the Republic enjoyed 1,000 years of peace. During this time, there was a massive boom in space exploration, the likes of which hadn't been seen for millennia. Vast swaths of the rim were opened up and incorporated into the Republic, adding hundreds of new sectors. While that sounds like a good thing, and while it was initially considered a good thing, this new wave of expansion came with a dark side. You see, when the Republic was first formed, it was determined that each sector, and thus one seat in the Senate, would represent a maximum of 50 systems. This rule was later stretched as the Republic expanded, but nonetheless, the new wave of expansion meant that hundreds of new sectors joined the Republic in the span of just 1,000 years. This was a logistical nightmare that rendered the Senate almost entirely ineffective, as it meant there were tens of thousands of senators at any given time. The Republic had become so massive that it was completely paralyzed. This didn't result in all that many problems on its own, as individual sectors were self-sufficient enough in peacetime with the Jedi and Republic military around. But it would only take one good crisis to bring down this house of cards, and sure enough, the mother of all crises was just around the corner. At the end of the Inter-Sith Wars period, an Umbaran Jedi Master named Pius left the Jedi Order and began traveling across the galaxy, seeking whatever remained of the Sith. Though the Sith were believed to be dead, that wasn't yet the case. Scattered cults had preserved Sith teachings in secret, and Pius sought each of them out, learning as much as he could from them. In 2000 BBY, he returned to the galaxy at large and declared himself the Dark Lord of the Sith, taking the name Darth Ruin. At first, he was joined by a group of 50 fallen Jedi, but this number quickly swelled to the hundreds. A fourth great schism had begun. Darth Ruin and his followers, the new Sith, carried out a guerrilla campaign against the Jedi Order, a war that soon spread to involve the Republic itself. Moving quickly, the Republic mustered its navy and began another military build-up, while the Jedi tried to nip the threat of the new Sith in the bud. Despite their efforts, the new Sith swelled rapidly. Darth Ruin himself didn't last long. He was relentlessly egotistical, something that resulted in the deaths of many of his followers, who eventually teamed up and murdered him. That didn't stop the new Sith though. For the next 1,000 years, which were later deemed the Dragulch period, the Republic was embroiled in the new Sith Wars. Like the old Sith, the new Sith set out to build an empire to rival the Republic, reclaiming old Sith worlds like Yavin 4 and Ziost. However, their empire, if it could even be called that, was nothing like those of past Sith orders. The new Sith were extremely fractious, divided between dozens of cults and orders led by self-proclaimed Dark Lords of the Sith. This hamstrung the new Sith, but it also made it harder for the Jedi or Republic to defeat them. Whenever one Sith army was crushed, two more sprung up elsewhere, steadily wearing down the Republic's strength. After the death of Darth Ruin, the next great Sith leader sprang up around 1750 BBY. Called the Dark Underlord, this shadowy spectre assembled a Sith alliance known as the Black Knights and launched a concerted assault on the Republic. He was ultimately defeated in the Battle of Malrev 4, in which Jedi Master Murtugh forged an alliance with the Mandalorians and crushed the Dark Underlord. The Black Knights were scattered, but the new Sith survived, and new Sith Lords rose to fill the power vacuum. The Mandalorians continued to help the Jedi and the Republic against the Sith for the rest of the conflict, though not even they were able to halt the Sith advance. By 1500 BBY, the Republic military had grown strong enough to slow the new Sith down, winning major battles at Gap 9, Corfelion, and King's Galquek. But in 1466 BBY, the new Sith emerged victorious from the decisive Battle of Mizra, which completely undid all of the Republic's earlier victories. In that battle, the Sith massacred their opponents, capturing hundreds of Jedi to turn to the dark side and killing hundreds more. The Battle of Mizra was so decisive that it effectively cost the Republic control of the Outer Rim. After the Battle of Mizra, the war turned against the Republic. Republic territory atrophied as new Dark Lords rose and fell. The Senate almost completely broke down, and for the first time in nearly 2,000 years, the Republic hemorrhaged territory, especially in the Outer Rim. Commerce and the HoloNet all but fell apart. Trying to stem the bleeding, the Jedi all but took over the Republic. After 1400 BBY, every Supreme Chancellor for the next 4 centuries was a Jedi, and during this period, many pockets of space came under the rule of Jedi Lords. But the Jedi Order was too small to run the galaxy and could only prolong the inevitable. From 1250 to 1230 BBY, under Dark Lord of the Sith Belia Darzu, the alchemically created techno-beast Plague ravaged the galaxy during the Sictus Wars, turning living beings into mechanized zombies. Around the same time, the deadly Kandorian Plague swept across Republic space and killed billions. In response to these twin threats, more and more sectors closed their borders and left the Republic, worsening its decline. After the end of the Sictus Wars, the Sith continued to grow stronger, even as the Republic weakened. By 1100 BBY, the Sith had gotten so strong that they were able to launch an assault on the core worlds themselves, the very heart of the Republic. They came perilously close to taking Coruscant, but at the last moment, their advance was stopped as self-proclaimed Dark Lords turned on each other, vying for supremacy. With the Sith distracted by infighting, the Jedi quickly beat them back to the Rim, but the damage was already done. The Republic had shrunk to just a scattering of sectors, and for the next 100 years, it all but ceased to exist. That century of chaos became known as the Republic Dark Age. Fortunately for the Republic, the Sith were also in turmoil for most of the Dark Age. However, this ended in 1010 BBY when the fallen Jedi Skera Khan gathered the warring Sith Lords and formed the Brotherhood of Darkness on the planet Rune, the final form of the new Sith. Under Khan, the Brotherhood of Darkness began another massive offensive against what was left of the Republic, claiming vast swaths of space in the Outer Rim and moving forward. Their victory seemed so certain that the Hutts broke their long policy of neutrality and officially joined the new Sith, vastly increasing their territory and power. But even with the Republic on its knees, the Jedi still defended it. Over the course of the new Sith Wars, many Jedi had become lords, serving as the legitimate rulers of sectors left undefended. One of these Jedi Lords, who went by the name Hoth, raised an army and began a counteroffensive against the Brotherhood, backed by what was left of the Republic military. Starting in 1004 BBY, Hoth defeated the Brotherhood in system after system, easing the pressure on the Republic. The final stage of the new Sith Wars was called the War of Light and Darkness, for it was almost entirely a battle between the Sith and the Jedi, with the Republic too weak to make a difference. In 1002 BBY, Hoth's army became the basis for an army of light, a massive force of Jedi Knights and their allies intended to combat the Brotherhood of Darkness. The two armies clashed across countless worlds before digging in to fight over one last planet, Ruusan, an unremarkable world in the Mid-Rim. Over the course of 1000 BBY, the Jedi and Sith fought 7 battles over Ruusan, each exhausting virtually all the strength they had left. Both sides fought hard, but thanks to the timely arrival of Jedi Lord Valentine Farfalla during the 7th Battle of Ruusan, the Army of Light ultimately triumphed. Lord Khan and the tattered remains of the Brotherhood retreated to the caves beneath the Valley of the Jedi, where, on the suggestion of Darth Bane, they created a thought bomb, a terrible force weapon that consumed the souls of all in the vicinity. In a last act of desperation, Khan and the Brotherhood detonated the thought bomb, killing themselves, Lord Hoth, and 100 other Jedi. In doing so, they all but wiped out the Sith. Now under the command of Lord Farfalla, the Army of Light emerged victorious from the crucible of Ruusan, though their losses were beyond the count of grief. In winning the 7th Battle of Ruusan, they also won the new Sith Wars. Beyond all hope, the threat of the new Sith had been extinguished at Ruusan. The Republic, utterly beaten as it was, had essentially won by default. 1000 BBY was the end of the era of the Old Republic and the beginning of a new age for the galaxy. Over the course of the next few centuries, it would again rebuild and become greater than ever before. But its new golden age wouldn't last. A single Sith Lord had survived the Battle of Ruusan, a Sith Lord named Darth Bane. As soon as the new Sith Wars ended, he set in motion his own campaign against the Republic, the Sith Grand Plan. When we last left the Republic, it had fallen to its lowest point yet. It had endured 1,000 years of the new Sith Wars and 100 years of the Republic Dark Age, losing most of its territory and structure in the process. In the 7th Battle of Ruusan, however, the Republic unexpectedly emerged victorious from the new Sith Wars, thanks to the Army of Light amassed by the Jedi Order. The galaxy was still in shambles, but against all hope, the Sith were gone, as far as anyone knew. Of course, the Republic was almost gone too, and the Jedi weren't looking that healthy either, but someone was bound to pick up the pieces. That someone ended up being Tarsus Valorum. In the wake of the 7th Battle of Ruusan, what was left of the Galactic Senate elected him Supreme Chancellor, making him the first non-Jedi Chancellor in over 400 years. Valorum boldly sought not only to rebuild the Republic, but to make it better than ever before. He had quite a lot of work ahead of him, but he met the challenge head on. Valorum had barely finished moving into his new office when he began drafting a series of reforms aimed at totally overhauling the Republic, the Ruusan Reformation. As part of the Reformation, the Republic overhauled Senate representation and how sector boundaries were drawn, greatly streamlining the legislative process and allowing formerly neglected rimworlds to finally get a say in government. In turn, Valorum transferred vast amounts of power from the Supreme Chancellor's office back to the Senate, and imposed term limits on his own position. The Reformation also dissolved the Republic military, relegating what was left of it to sector-based planetary security forces and the much smaller judicial forces. Finally, the Ruusan Reformation formally demilitarized the Jedi, legally incorporating them into the judicial forces, forcing them to give up their lordships and putting them under senatorial oversight. The Ruusan Reformation not only allowed the Republic to rapidly rebuild, but also allowed it to rebound at an unprecedented rate. Millennia's worth of bureaucratic waste were totally eliminated, and for the first time in ages, the Republic became a functional government again. As a result, the Republic started to regain the territory it had lost, at a rapid rate, a process Valorum called the Great Reunification. Within a century of the Ruusan Reformation, the Republic regained most of what it had lost during the New Sith Wars. With that said, there were a few regions it never truly regained control of, such as the Sith worlds, and many other regions fell under Hutt control. While the Republic underwent the Ruusan Reformation, the Sith had a little reformation of their own. Unbeknownst to the Jedi, a single Sith Lord survived the 7th Battle of Ruusan, Darth Bane. Bane founded the Order of the Sith Lords, which he ruled according to the rule of 2. He took a young girl as his apprentice, who he named Darth Zana, and together they began rebuilding the wealth and power of the Sith in secret. Unlike the Sith that came before him, Darth Bane had no illusions of overcoming the Republic by force. Instead, he concocted the Sith Grand Plan, a plot to destroy the Republic from within. He and his successors would slowly build up a vast power base, hiding behind alter egos and weakening the Republic gradually. There were flaws in Valorum's new system, and Bane was determined to find and exploit them, worsening corruption and the Republic's other weaknesses. What's more, he planned to do so without openly confronting the Jedi Order, hoping to destroy them from within as well. The 1,000 years between 1000 BBY and 32 BBY were called the Golden Age of the Republic, and in many ways, that label was accurate. The Republic's core regions enjoyed an unprecedented era of prosperity, and even the Rimworlds were better off than usual, a rarity under any galactic government. But even the Golden Age had a dark side to it. There was the literal dark side, of course. Throughout the era, the Sith grew stronger, slowly infiltrating the Republic and furthering Bane's grand plan. But the Republic faced a number of other issues during this period too, many of which it could do nothing about. 3 problems stood out: piracy, slavery, and war. The dissolution of the Republic military was at first a boon to the sectors of the Outer Rim, which could easily defend themselves for the first time in their history. But as the Golden Age went on, the planetary security forces of these remote sectors deteriorated as the Rimworlds were forced to rely exclusively on the aging tech they had been given under the Reformation. As a result, piracy became a massive problem on the Rim, as violent gangs could just steal a few more modern warships and beat the Sith out of whatever the Rimworlds could muster to defend themselves. The Republic judicial forces, including the Jedi, regularly tried to crush these pirate gangs, but new ones just kept popping up. Slavery was outlawed in the Republic, of course, and whenever it was uncovered in Republic space, the Jedi put a stop to it. But there was little the Jedi could do about the Hutts, who now controlled a massive portion of the galaxy and had built a whole civilization on the backs of slaves. While the Jedi and judicial forces could deal with smaller slave civilizations, like the Zygerians or the Thalassians, there was just nothing they could do against the Hutts. Individual Jedi Knights often swooped in and freed a few hundred slaves at a time on Hutt-controlled worlds, but this ultimately didn't make a dent in the Hutt's vast slaving apparatus. Thus, slavery persisted almost unchecked in Hutt space. Lastly, the Republic had to deal with several minor conflicts over the course of the Golden Age. None of these were full-scale wars, of course, but smaller conflicts did happen. Some were simple local affairs, others, like the Mandalorian excision, were much more involved. The Mandalorians had been allies of the Republic and the Jedi during the New Sith Wars, from the Battle of Malrev 4 all the way to the start of the Dark Age, at which point they went off on their own. But the Republic never really came to trust the Mandalorians, and when they began a major rearmament 200 years after Ruusan, the Senate became uneasy. Fearing that another round of Mandalorian wars were brewing, the Jedi and the judicial forces launched a preemptive strike on Mandalorian space. Called the Mandalorian Excision, this war took place in 738 BBY and saw the judicial forces absolutely annihilate several Mandalorian worlds. Whole regions of worlds like Mandalore were bombed to dust, becoming vast deserts of white sand. The Mandalorians' military capabilities were almost entirely eliminated, and the Republic installed a puppet government on Mandalore led by the New Mandalorians, a local pacifist movement. This stabilized the sector and reshaped the Mandalorians into peaceful friends of the Republic, at least for a time. The militaristic side of Mandalorian culture never completely faded though, and Mandalore suffered several civil wars over the course of the Golden Age. As the Golden Age continued, the various problems of the Republic worsened, no doubt thanks in part to the Sith. 312 years before the Battle of Yavin, when the Trade Federation was founded, things had intensified to the point that the Republic was beginning to fear another collapse in the Outer Rim. During the Golden Age, the Republic had once more pushed the fringe of civilization, settling new sectors of the Western Reaches and the New Territories. However, the Republic's colonies in these regions were severely neglected and discontent was spreading. Hoping to resolve the various problems faced by the Rim with a band-aid, the Republic declared the whole Outer Rim a free trade zone, meaning that companies like the Trade Federation could operate there tax-free. This measure was successful in getting corporations to set up in the Outer Rim, but it also ended up creating more problems than it solved. The Trade Federation, the Intergalactic Banking Clan, and the other guilds built their own mini-empires out of frontier colonies. They protected Rimworlds from pirates and slavers with their private armies, but then they turned around and exploited the Rimworlds themselves. As far as the Senate was concerned, however, the effort was a success. For hundreds of years, the mega corporations were allowed to do their thing out on the Rim, so long as they didn't cause problems for the central government. However, as we all know full well, the uneasy peace that the mega corporations created didn't last, and eventually, the problems they caused became big enough that the Republic had to get off its butt. Naturally, this was because of Sith manipulation. In the 100 years before the Battle of Naboo, Darth Tenebrous and Darth Plagueis slowly shaped the mega corporations into Sith puppets. After he killed his master in 67 BBY, Plagueis and his new apprentice, Darth Sidious, slowly began to put these puppets to use, leading them to militarize and start new conflicts. As the Republic Golden Age started to draw to a close, the Sith orchestrated events like the Stark Hyperspace War, using the Megacorps to create small fiascos that weakened the Republic. Starting in 33 BBY, the Sith began preparing for the final stage of their grand plan. By this point, the Republic had become thoroughly bogged down with corruption, and their corporate puppets all but owned vast swaths of the Outer Rim. In his guise as Senator Palpatine of the Chomel sector, Darth Sidious convinced Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum to put an end to the Outer Rim's free trade zone. This was the political equivalent of poking a hornet's nest. The Trade Federation and the other guilds were beyond livid and objected to the measure. Valorum tried to resolve the matter by holding a summit between Senate representatives and the Trade Federation Directorate at Eriadu. But Sidious ensured that the event was a total disaster, further radicalizing the Trade Federation. We all know what happened next. Furious over the taxation of the Outer Rim trade routes, the Trade Federation launched a blockade and invasion of Naboo, the homeworld of the Senator who had put an end to their free trade zone. The following sequence of events led to the discovery of the Chosen One, the reveal of the survival of the Sith, and the Trade Federation's defeat on Naboo. But most importantly, it propelled Senator Palpatine of Naboo to the Supreme Chancellery. While everyone was distracted by the Battle of Naboo, the Sith quietly seized control of the Republic, and the rise of the Empire began. This brings us to the modern era of galactic history at long last. What you're seeing on screen is a map of the galaxy as it was during the Battle of Naboo, the start of the prequel era. We really hope you've enjoyed our series on the history of the Republic. It's been a hell of a ride, and for those of you who've been watching from the very beginning, thank you for your continued support. We'll see you all in the next video.